Hello, everybody. Welcome into my latest live broadcast. It's sort of a off-the-cuff broadcast here on a Saturday. Yeah, sometimes we do these just as time permits. This one isn't going to be mind-blowing, but hopefully informational and maybe a little entertaining along the way. Today it's Saturday. It's the 13th of April, 2024. My name is CareyHolzman still. I'll let you know when that changes. In the meantime, hope everybody's doing okay. And thank you guys for popping in on no notice whatsoever that I was going live. A very spontaneous opportunity arose, and I thought, let's grab it with both hands and see what happens. Now, I've made no secret about some struggles in getting some boards ready to talk about the overvoltage that's occurring from motherboard manufacturers across the board on modern day Intel 12th, 13th, 14th generation chips. Now, it's also possible this was occurring on previous generations, but now it's been brought to my attention because it's causing a problem. There is some news going around. Actually, I could probably do a quick Google search for Intel 12th gen CPUs failing during gaming. And there are some reports of the 12th, 13th, and 14th gen chips that were running fine for 2 or 3 months. And then suddenly the games are crashing. Now, NVIDIA came out officially and said, this is not our drivers causing this problem. This is an Intel problem. And I'm just kind of doing a quick search while we're live here just to see if I can pull up any random articles here. I probably need to hit the news tab. Here we go. So just as an example, and I don't know this website, I don't recommend it, I'm just grabbing it because we're live and to use as an example. Of course, I encourage you, if you're interested, to do your own research and verification on anything you hear or see online. Take everything with a grain of salt. And a lot of times with YouTube content creators and even journalists, they just parrot out information that may not have been correctly interpreted. But just to give you an example of what I'm talking about here, we'll take a quick look at this site here talking about, if I can get my mouse to work, Intel Raptor Lake 13th, 14th gen, which would include 12th gen too, by the way. Core stability issues now mentioned in GPU driver notes. NVIDIA is aware of Intel problems and recommends, if you're having game crashing that's starting to happen, it's not because of a driver update, it's NVIDIA saying talk to your CPU maker. I like how they don't name Intel. Just talk to your CPU maker in case of stability issues. Now, I don't know what Intel is going to conclude from this, but I can assume, and I'm going to make a prediction that, well, quite frankly, I will be more than happy to be wrong about. But here's what I think is happening. When you send too much voltage to the CPU, or in this case, we're talking about watts, we're talking about the Intel recommended power level 1 and power level 2 maximum settings or recommended settings from Intel are being disrespected, and the boundaries are completely being ignored by the motherboard manufacturers. And Intel, who could put their foot down and tell the motherboard manufacturers to stop this, is permitting it. In order for ASUS and ASRock and Gigabyte and MSI, in order for them to build motherboards and have them ready so that when you buy a new Intel chip, you have motherboards ready to buy, they have to work with Intel, with Intel's blessing. So if Intel is allowing this, and then what ends up happening, if this is what's happening, if the overvolting is causing a significant CPU degradation that is well beyond what was anticipated, instead of taking off a couple of years of life on the CPU, it may be ticking off, and I'm only speculating here, but it may be reducing the CPU life by 99%. So what ends up happening is your CPU works great for the first couple months, but that constant overvoltage being fed to it by the motherboard without the consent or knowledge in many cases of the end user. The motherboard automatically does this by default, and turning that down or back to Intel spec is quite complicated. So I thought I would get one of each board, an MSI, a Gigabyte, an ASRock, and an ASUS board. For those of you that may be impacted by having trouble keeping your CPU cool, and maybe you're spending all kinds of money on coolers unnecessarily, driving yourself crazy trying to figure out why is your CPU running so hot. The motherboard manufacturers universally, they all do this. They all overvolt these 12th, 13th, and 14th gen Intel chips. Because if they didn't, then they'd look like they were performing worse and you wouldn't buy them. So in order to stay in the marketplace, whoever started this, the others started to do it as well, or they would be perceived as being less value. So in order to get more performance out of the chip, they send more voltage and they send more wattage to it. In this case, we're referring to the wattage of the PL1 and the PL2. And they're ignoring Intel's recommended standards, nor are they even making it easy for you to go back and set it to the PL1 and PL2 recommended standards. And on top of that, they don't make it easy to figure out where that is and how to put it back. It is a mess. But what ends up happening is if Intel chips are being sent back to Intel under warranty, which they would be covered under warranty by Intel, and it's happening on a massive scale, well, then as you can imagine, this is going to cost Intel millions of dollars, not to mention the PR damage about the reliability of their chips. Now, it's totally possible Intel has a manufacturing issue that's affecting some of these chips, and that's why they're failing. But given that Intel really doesn't have a history of that, and they've got a solid history of chip making for many decades, seems less likely, but still possible. We don't know. And Intel forensics teams are looking into this to figure out what's going on. But I think it's pretty obvious. So I bought some boards to cover this subject matter before this news hit. And I think the two are related. But regardless of that, if you own a 12th, 13th, or 14th gen Intel chip, and especially if you're concerned about how hot your chip is getting, I'm going to explain why. Sometimes people don't experience issues with the CPU running hot until after a BIOS update. And that's because the BIOS update implements this new idea that we're going to send as much voltage as possible to the chip, and the chip will tell us when to back off, rather than following Intel's recommendations. In doing so, it's going to reduce the life of the CPU. It's going to degrade it. PC World magazine recently had Dr. Ian Cuttress on to talk about CPU degradation caused specifically by this condition. And they were sort of theorizing what was possible with regards to how this would affect the longevity of the chip overall. Now, this is a problem that's likely going to go away in the next, in future generations of Intel chips, because they move away from a monolithic chip architecture, which is, if you pull the CPU internal heat shield off, underneath of it, you'll see a giant chip underneath there. They're going to go to little tiny chips, or what we call chiplets, that are all interconnected, and trying to overvolt those and such is going to get much more complex. And in fact, I would even suggest maybe avoiding the new architecture on the 15th gen, because it's going to have problems like any Generation 1 product. We'll see, and of course, we'll cover it here so you don't have to worry about it, but that's likely making this a unique problem for 12th, 13th, and 14th generation owners. Furthermore, if Intel does in fact find out what I'm speculating to be the cause, then there will be a required BIOS update that I imagine Intel would say to the motherboard makers, if you want to work with us in the future, you can't cost us this money and damage our reputation by allowing this overvoltage to occur. If the users want to do that themselves, you can always enable that for those users who have the knowledge and will take responsibility for the damage. But if we're doing it out of the box without the user's knowledge or consent, it's just making us look bad. It's costing us money. So if you want to work with us in the future, you won't work against us, you'll work with us, or we won't work with you. That's where I think this is going. So when I was buying different motherboards to showcase this, I've got a Gigabyte, ASRock, MSI, and ASUS. I was prepping them so I can show you how the PL1 and PL2 settings are being set without your consent or knowledge out of the box, and how difficult it is to find them and change them, because it's a different process for each motherboard maker. where it is and what it looks like and how it's described varies depending on who makes the board. And to make it even more confusing, it may even vary based on the model of board, even from the same manufacturer. So I'm not going to go all the way over the top and cover every detail, but I will take a reasonable attempt at showing you to educate you, to show you what I'm looking for, the general area in which I'm looking for it, and the general concept of identifying it, so that you don't have to follow along like a robot, but you can use that brain, that gray matter between your ears, in order to define and to seek out that which you know to identify, versus just following along, click here, click there. So I'd say following along is like remembering the dance moves of a song. You don't necessarily have any dancing skills if all you're doing is memorizing moves that some choreographer taught you when you practiced. On the other hand, if you're just jamming out improvisationally to a song and you're gathering attention in a good way, and you have this natural talent, you can dance, that may be something you've learned, it may be something you're born with, but regardless of that, there's ritualizing repairs, which is what we see a lot of online, where nothing is explained other than click here, click this, do that, and this is your end result. And people do it and they get the end result, and they don't really know if any of those steps were extraneous or unnecessary. But then when somebody else has the same problem they just fixed by following these dance moves, this ritual, then what do? They tell the next person, you put your right hand in, you put your right hand out, and then when you're all done, it works. But when anybody asks why, very few people can answer that. So in order to explain this scenario, I want to demonstrate what I'm looking for so that you don't have to worry about your board being different. So you can confidently look in there with the same logical reasoning to be able to identify what it is you're looking for versus being told exactly where to go and what to do. So in this case, it complicates this video a bit. And what complicated it yet again was the ASUS board that I ordered. It won't let me install Windows without locking up. And in my diagnostic that I've already done previously, I changed every part. There's been a CPU sitting right here the last couple videos. That CPU was in here. I swapped it out with another CPU. I swapped the RAM out with different RAM. I swapped the SSD out with a different SSD. I swapped the power supply with another power supply. I've updated the BIOS. Nothing's making any difference. I went back one BIOS version. Doesn't make any difference. I thought, let's demonstrate it here. Let's verify the problem together. And then I sent a refund or return exchange request to Amazon, because I ordered this from Amazon. And the parts I'm using today, they're all in the video notes below the video. This board was on sale for $99. It's not anymore. But the good news is the 13500 chip is only $200 now. Price went down on that. It wasn't when I did this. So these are all 14500 chips, which are a little bit more. At the time, they were actually $5 less. This is how quickly the industry changes and why we're using the parts we're using. The 14500 was $239 US dollars. The 13500 was $245 US dollars. So why would I buy the older chip and pay $5 more? Today, the 14500 is still around $240, but the 13500 is now $199. But now this motherboard that was $99 is now like $149, $139. So something's wrong with the board. And then it took Amazon like 10 days to get me an exchanged board. And I have 30 days to return this board. So I want to verify that there is a possibility that this OLOY RAM that works great with every motherboard manufacturer I've used it on. It may be ASUS doesn't like it. And the only other RAM I have, well, it's a different model of RAM. It's still made by OLOY. So I ordered some more RAM. This is getting very expensive. But let's just recreate what the original problem is. And now that I have the spare board, we can then move all these components to the new board. Let's see what happens. If it's the RAM, I anticipate we're still going to not, we're going to lock up during the Windows 11 installation. If that's the case, I know it's not the board. As you can imagine, this gets quite expensive if you're a home user trying to self-diagnose. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's not worth it. You know, the parts we're dealing with here aren't multi-thousands of dollars in equipment. But thank goodness for Amazon's return policy, because I'll be counting on it a lot during this whole process. So let me start by putting the RAM back in it, because I've taken the RAM out. As you can imagine, my frustration level on this is quite high. And I'm kind of glad Amazon took some time to get the replacement board back to me, so I had some time to get my mind off of it. Because the more I thought about it, the more I just kept coming around in circles to where I've already been, and was kind of stuck and angry, frustrated. I haven't used ASUS boards in a while, and this is just more confirmation as to why I personally will stay away from ASUS boards. Even if this works, I'm so burned by it. I'm accustomed to just grabbing whatever RAM I want, whatever CPU I want that's compatible with the socket, whatever SSD I want, regardless of manufacturer or gen, and I put it in whatever motherboard I want. And on the Intel side, everything just always works. Go back and watch my live video builds and you'll see. You'll see me tearing the plastic off brand new products, putting them all together, and they just work. So for ASUS to be the one exception to that, if there is a RAM compatibility here, it's inexcusable. If something's wrong with the board, it's inexcusable. To me, I don't make a lot of money at this, so any sort of delay in causing it to get done prevents me from working on the next thing. And because I don't make a lot of money on it, that means I can't make much money on the next thing until I wrap this one up. So instead of making money, it's costing me money. That's not a good way to stay in business. It might be fun for a hobby, but as you can imagine, I don't have the patience for it. Not when I'm accustomed to being spoiled by literally every other manufacturer by comparison. So I've grown accustomed to raising my expectations. I understand, things happen. It could be a fluke. That's what we're here to find out today. Will the replacement board do the same thing, or does the replacement board fix the problem? Or am I going to hook all this up and suddenly it's just going to work while we're live on camera because, Murphy's Law? It's kind of exciting. Let's find out. This is real life tech work. This is what I do. And with as much as I've been through already on this board, and I feel I've been quite thorough, I fully expect, obviously, or I wouldn't be doing this live, that this is going to perform and lock up exactly as it has been consistently since I got it. If it proves me wrong, what can you do? But I don't suspect it will. With these videos being live and unscripted, everything is very improvisational of the moment, and nothing is rehearsed. We really don't know what's going to happen other than me describing to you what brought us here today. Now, I can't do the video about the CPU wattage issue until I have a working ASUS board. Otherwise, why even start the video? But I can't do that until I have a working ASUS board. And in the meantime, Intel's, working on this issue that they've been made aware of that may or may not be exactly what this video is needed for. I don't know yet. So we'll see who gets there first. I see our friends Oystein's in the chat room. We'll shout out hello to Buster and Frankie B as well for being such generous contributors here. They sent some contributions on yesterday's stream, and I missed them, unfortunately. So I want to say thank you. A little late, but thank you, of course, to these individuals for their extreme generosity that helps keep us going over here. Obviously, ASUS isn't paying us any money to make this video. That's harsh to them, nor have they ever. So it's not like they'd start today. Let me step around. Let's get this plugged in over here. So we've got the power supply off. We've got an HDMI cable to plug in somewhere right here. I don't need a network cable yet because we need to get Windows installed first. I will need a keyboard and a mouse, and as you can see, I've left out my little portable keyboard and mouse and my little power switch. Isn't it cute, my little power switch? Lesser techs would use a screwdriver or metal implement to short out 2 pins. Philistine. It's like using a salad fork to eat your meat. Are we not refined and civilized? All right, I'm just teasing. All right, let's put this on. I think it goes right there. I think that's our pins. And then keyboard and mouse. Okay. We'll just plug that into any USB port back here. That'll be good. Okay, finally, what else do I need? I need something. Keep your jokes to yourself. I need a Windows 11 installation USB flash drive, which I have here. And I have a video showing you how to make this free and legally direct from Microsoft. You just have to buy a legal key to activate it if you haven't already activated previously. And you can pick those up for about 90% off retail price from our friends at VIP CDK Deals. Everything's guaranteed. We've been using and promoting them now for going on 2 years. And I hope we can continue for the next 10 years, because I don't want you guys to feel like you have to hoard keys. Wait until you need a product key and then go purchase it. And that way, if you have any issues, you reach out to their customer service, they'll take care of you. If you wait more than 30 days before you ever use the key and you have a problem, this is something similar and akin to what hackers do or people trying to swindle. And we're living in a world now where everybody sort of defaults to, you're trying to rip me off. The buyer thinks the seller's trying to rip them off. The seller thinks the buyer's trying to rip them off. So if we follow the standard practices, then you're not being suspected of doing something fishy. The seller is going to stand behind their product and guarantee it. And if you run into any issues outside of that, you contact me directly, because I've got your back. And I'm happy and proud to say, I think since we started this nearly 2 years ago, there were 3 or 4 issues, and most of them were end user fault, where they picked the wrong product. It's a very difficult thing to try to return a product key, to be able to prove you didn't activate it, and now you're trying to, you see what I mean? Everybody thinks the other person's trying to get them, when all they did was make a mistake. And we got that. We got them resolved. All right? But do be careful when you order your product keys, because it's not pleasant to go through that and convince them that you're not swindling. But at the same time, they do have excellent customer service, and the keys are guaranteed to work. And I stand behind it. I don't know any other YouTuber that stands behind the companies they promote the way I do. But I wouldn't promote them if I didn't use them myself. And I wasn't willing to put my own money down to make sure that you have peace of mind, that it's not about your problems. You know, oh, that's your problem. I don't do that. All right, so hello to all my friends in blue. I see Mortaunt in there, 55. Staying Due, Essentia Working Too Hard. Ralph Kirby and Glenn's Music all joining us in there. Welcome in, guys. Good to see you, my friends. I need a power cord. Did I not plug a power cord in? Oh, you caught me. You caught me. Maybe that's been the whole problem this whole time. No, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have even started the install of Windows 11 without the power cord. It couldn't be that easy. Oystein wants to know if it's wireless power. Yes. Yes, it is. If I were you, I wouldn't walk between the sending unit and the receiving unit, where you could be wirelessly electrified. Be careful where you step. Don't cross the streams. Let's try and fire this up. I think I've left the SSD in it, which may have a incomplete install of Windows 11 on it. Let's just see what happens. So let me go to my HDMI input here. Bear with me for a second. And I'll put myself up in that corner. Okay. And then I'll hit switch here. Okay, fan is turning. We should get some kind of a post. See the RAM RGB just lit up over here on my side. I'm going to hit the delete key to get us into the BIOS. Well, in the BIOS, and you know what? Let's just get rid of camera 1 here for a second so we can identify where we want to boot to. So normally you can hit a key on the keyboard depending on the make and model of computer you have. It could be F12, it could be F8, it could be whatever, to get to your boot options. In this case, I'll hit F7, which is identified down on the bottom right here for advanced mode. And then under, is it under boot? Here it says boot override. And I want to make sure I don't boot to that solid state drive. So we'll do the first partition on the UEFI SanDisk. That's my Windows 11 installation media. And when I click on that, the system automatically restarts and should be loading now from the flash drive. And that all looks correct. So when we hit next and install now, we may have existing partitions on the SSD. And we want to remove all of those. We want to erase all the data off the SSD. I tell it I don't have a product key, but if in fact this does get successful, I will, at the end of it, verifying everything's working. Oh, look, I'm already frozen. My mouse no longer works. Everything's locked up. I am totally locked up right now. I couldn't even get that far. I mean, this is absolutely maddening to me. Nothing's, hello? Hello, computer. Hello? Didn't work. Again, swap the RAM, swap the CPU, swap the SSD. It locks, not always in the same place, but it never lets me get through a Windows 11 install. But it also doesn't show me any errors. I can get into the BIOS just fine. And not a problem I have seen with any other board from any other manufacturer. This is strictly this board from ASUS, and maybe that's why it was on sale for $99.99. I don't know. So I'm going to try one more time, probably in vain, but we'll see if we get any further with it. But it should be pretty consistent in the lockup. So let's go ahead and turn it back on. And once again, I'm going to hit the delete key to get me back into the BIOS. And then delete, get me in there. F7, over to boot, and then over to UEFI SanDisk, resets, should be loading. Now, I wouldn't have to do this if a failed Windows 11 install wasn't already in progress on the SSD. So normally, you know, the SSDs I put in, they're fresh and new, and they don't have any partitions or data on them. So the motherboard would have no choice but to boot to the only bootable thing. It already looks like we've locked up, like nothing's even happened. It's consistently inconsistent. It always does this differently. Do I think that the Windows flash drive may be faulty for not installing? That's what Ron wants to know. Well, if I hadn't been using this USB flash drive for the last 395 installs over the last couple of years, not to mention updating the flash drive regularly when a Windows 11 new ISO image comes out, I might be on board with you, but this flash drive has a known good history. It's got a, now it's possible, but it would be unprecedented in that I've never had a flash drive that was working not work. In other words, the flash drive is booting and it's trying to install Windows 11. And I have since used the flash drive on other builds. Remember, this isn't something that happened an hour ago. This happened 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago. And I have since done other work on other systems, and I have used that flash drive since then. So I'm going to have to say, with that additional information I provided you, that there's no way it could be the flash drive unless it's an incompatibility with the flash drive. But if we use our imagination, we could go on endlessly with, could it be the USB port itself? Could we try a different USB port? Could it be the keyboard and the mouse? Could it be, you know, could it? As a technician, though, part of my job is to get to the solution as quickly as possible. The longer it takes me, the less I make. And the longer the next customer has to wait. If the customer waits too long, they're going to take their business somewhere else, and then I'm going to lose even more money. So if you notice, everything in my world is done very impatiently. I have to keep moving. I don't have any other employees that can pick up where I left off. I guarantee you, Wherever I left it off is where it stays until I get to it again. And if that belongs to a customer, that customer isn't paying me until that job is done. And the next customer can't be helped until that job is done. Okay, so put yourself in my position and think about that. So let's back over to F7, back over to boot, and it doesn't lock up at all, right? It's fine. And then we tell it, boot to the flash drive, it resets. Let's see how far we get this time. I've changed the heat sink. I've changed the thermal compound on it. I've done everything I can do to try to eliminate what should be the obvious things. Now look how much further we got this time than the previous 2 times, which I think is, partly fascinating that it appears promising, like it's going to work. And, did we even make it this far? It just locked. Okay, so I think I understand why they call it Windows, because it makes you want to throw it out the windows. Let's go ahead and turn this off because, as you can see, it's a bit maddening. One of the easiest way to diagnose a problem is that the problem happens consistently. So if a system won't turn on, that's a pretty easy thing to fix. If it's always the same, every time I hit the power button, nothing happens, that's a very easy problem to fix. Every time I click on this, that happens. As long as we can replicate the problem, it's super easy to fix that. But when the problem isn't consistent, or if the problem is intermittent, where it only happens sometimes, and it doesn't matter if it's a problem with your car, a problem with your health, whether you're a doctor or a mechanic or a technician, diagnosing those sometimes problems are always uncertain because you never quite know if you fixed it, because how much time do you spend testing? The best test is to give it back to the customer and see if they come back. And so the wheel goes around until the problem is finally resolved. And if that wheel has to go around a few times, you're going to have a pretty pissed off customer and you're going to be losing a lot of money as you can't keep billing the customer every single time you haven't fixed it right. They'll be expecting you to fix it at no further expense until it's resolved. And in the meantime, you're not helping the next person in line. Again, being self-employed, this can put a lot of stress and pressure on you because the rent is still due at the end of the month, right? So with that being said, over here, let me go grab this. I have a different, or rather a replacement exchange on a Prime B760-PLUS. These were not returned. These are brand new boards. And I have until the 25th to return this to Amazon or they're going to bill me for it. And what's great is Amazon doesn't charge me anything to return it. If I miss that return window, then I have to create a return merchandise authorization or RMA with the manufacturer. They have to authorize it, give me an RMA number, and I have to box it up and pay to have it shipped back to the manufacturer, who will then turn around and send me a new one. Nobody fixes these. These days, everything just gets replaced. Nobody, if you buy a brand new car and then your brand new $80,000 car, your transmission goes out, nobody at the dealership is fixing that transmission. They'll just be dropping the old transmission, putting in a new one, getting you out of there as quickly as possible, and sending the old one back to the manufacturer. Now, they may sell it off to a third-party refurbisher, or they themselves may refurbish it, but it can no longer be sold as new regardless. So a lot of times that's just how things are done these days. It's redefining how we repair as a scale of economy, where labor costs more than parts do, and customers don't want to wait, and repairs sometimes aren't done correctly. So if you simply swap the part out, you don't have to worry about the repair being incomplete. Customer doesn't wait as long. You can get more customers through the door, get them processed, get them back out. And then your technicians are mostly just part swappers now. You have to diagnose beyond knowing which parts to swap. So I did think maybe there was a RAM issue here, and I did switch the RAM for a different set of RAM, but was also from OLOY. So it's still possible, even though the latest ASUS BIOS update says it expands RAM compatibility. Those are often all that's needed to have a set of non-working RAM start working, just a BIOS update. But I've never had a problem with OL/OY RAM. This is the first time I've ever seen it. And I want to remind you all the parts I'm using, everything from the SSD to the RAM, they were brand new. So my level of frustration and my patience is through the roof on this because I'm frustrated and this is unjustifiable. There's no way this should have got through quality control. Everything is operated by machine now, so everything is done exactly the same. The factories don't shut down for lunch or, maybe a little maintenance here and there, but they run 24/7. They do everything exactly the same. They never have a bad mood. They never call in sick. The machines are just doing everything precisely. It's hard to believe there's anything that could go bad between the manufacturing and giving it to the customer. There's no moving parts until I add the heatsink. So I just find this unjustifiable. It's very strange. It's abnormal. Now, I hope this is an exception. I hope this is not the way ASUS conducts business now, and that I just got unlucky because it's been a long time since I've opened a brand new part of any kind, power supply, motherboard, CPU, RAM, solid state drive, and then found it didn't work brand new out of the box. And I show that all the time here on my channel. It's all live and unscripted. We never know what's going to happen. It's kind of easy to predict. It's likely going to be the same as the time before that and the time before that. So when something unusual like this happens, it's inexcusable to me. But again, it may just be a fluke. The only way I know is to swap it out with another one, move all the suspected parts that could be the problem onto the new board. And if the new board doesn't lock up, we know that the only part remaining is the board that could be the problem. And I don't want to diagnose it further than that. It's a brand new board. It's under warranty. It's not my problem. And any attempt to fix it would void the warranty. So there's no incentive from the owner of the board to do that added work, which would ultimately cost them the loss of any future warranty. So let the manufacturer do it. Save yourself the trouble. And save yourself the grief. So this was a brand new heatsink, and I just slapped it down on that chip there. I don't know. We're not pushing the board hard enough for the heatsink to even be an issue anyway. So the install of Windows is not exactly a resource-intensive task. Let's go ahead and get the solid-state drive out of here. Now, just because I'm a nice, considerate guy, I will take and move the entire SSD because the heat shield we've got on here, it has a thermal tape that the SSD is kind of stuck to. And since it's not a serialized part, rather than pull the tape off of this one, I'll just move it. Keep life easy. We know that this decorative heat shield is not the cause of our problem. It's not a serialized part that would kick back the return as not being the same as what they sent us. But I certainly don't have to. I'm under no obligation to do this. I just figure it's easier for me and it's easier for them. Even though making it easier for them is not really in my best interest. They're not going to acknowledge that. All right, they won't know any better. As far as they know, I didn't even use it. Now, let me put this in here. So the tape, it's a little bit sticky. It's not glued on there, but I would say it's sticky. So be cautious when you're removing it. Hopefully you won't have to do this on a new build. Normally they go together without these problems. This is highly unusual. Hence the reason for the video and why we do it live, so you know Nothing here was set up. There's no bias. I'm not out to get ASUS or anything like that. With the world becoming where it's getting harder and harder to tell what's fake from what's real, I figure as long as I can do this live, you know as well as I do that, especially given my history here, that what you're seeing is actually happening in real time. And I was going somewhere with that. Well, this is only going to probably get more confusing with the advent of artificial intelligence and videos created. They're having TV shows made that are made and generated entirely by AI. It's going to be hard to know that the actor you're watching isn't really a person at all, but just computer generated. Sadly, I'm sorry to say, I am not computer generated. I have generated a few computers, though, in my time. So I probably have it coming. They'll be getting their revenge on me. Let's get the CPU moved over. This is the second brand new 14500 chip I put in here. So let's just take all of our questionable parts that could be causing this to lock up and move every single one of them to the new motherboards. So that way, if it does make a difference, we know for a fact it's something wrong with the board. We don't have to go any further than that because, again, it's a warranty issue. It goes back to ASUS and Amazon. Their return period, as long as we're within the 30 days of purchase, is very generous. You don't have to pass a test, right? You just say, I want to return it. Doesn't matter what. There are a couple of grooves cut out in the CPU socket that make lifting out the CPU much easier than if you try and grab it any other way. But on the left and right, where there are sort of wings on the edges of the internal heat shield, you can just lift that straight out. Now, a lot of times you'll see me use my suction cup, but when there's thermal compound already on there, I don't want to clean that off because we're just moving it. We're going to put everything back together again. And with that on there, the suction cup isn't going to do much, is it? So we'll just do this the old school way with our fingers. Make sure that's seated. Lower the retention bracket and lock it down. Okay, then I want to take and I just got thermal compound on my fingers. We'll take this little cover. This is a very important little cover that protects all the little delicate pins in the CPU socket. And if we don't put that back on, our warranty is null and void. Even though Amazon will probably still take it back, they shouldn't. They should kick it back and say, sorry, you sent us a board irresponsibly. We wanted it sent back to us the same way you got it. If we didn't send it to you that way, don't send it back to us that way. So even though Amazon will oftentimes look the other way, it's usually the next person who gets the board who's the one that gets burned by your lack of consideration. And I really wish Amazon would enforce the rules and say, hey, we sent this to you with these parts in this condition. We expect it back the same way if you want all of your money back. Otherwise, we're going to figure out what all of the things that you've sent back differently or missing completely, what they cost to replace, and take that out of your refund amount. Amazon does not do that. Really wish they would. Because I've seen some stuff returned that I can't believe. There's a whole return scam on Amazon, and it's costing small-time sellers a fortune. So there is some pressure on Amazon to do something about it. But Amazon doesn't really care if it's costing the small sellers. And Amazon's messing with investor money. So Amazon wants to make sure the customer is taken care of, even when the customer is exploiting them at their expense. They still tolerate that quite a bit. There's whole news stories on this if you're interested in learning more about this scam. And it's happening right now in record numbers. The return fraud is insane. All right, heatsink back on. And we'll put the RAM back in. power switch. And then finally, the HDMI cable, keyboard, power cable. So as you can see, most repairs, most diagnostic and repairs on computers should roughly take about 10-15 minutes to figure out. Once you've stripped away everything you don't need, like the networking, or printers, or USB drives, when you strip it down to just RAM, storage, CPU, cooler, power, nothing else, you can just diagnose which of those 5 things is the bad thing. Shouldn't take very long as you have spare parts. Right, so we have power supply is 1 thing, CPU is 2, RAM is 3, SSD or storage is 4. So I only mess with 1 storage device at a time. Disconnect all the others. The motherboard is 5. You just have to check 5 things. It shouldn't take more than 15 or 20 minutes, even if all you're doing is swapping it out with something else that you know is good. And even if it wasn't good, what are the odds that it would be bad in the exact same way, you know, and have the exact same symptom? That would be a little hard to believe. Very, very unusual. Now, with all that hooked back up, let's go back over to my HDMI input here. I'll put myself back in a corner. And let's turn this board on. Probably need to turn the power supply on, right? Okay, fan is spinning. We're doing our first power on. That means it may take up to 3 minutes, 2 to 3 minutes, as the BIOS figures out, hey, what CPU did you just plug in? What RAM and what timings of that RAM did you just plug in? And we call that training. So the BIOS is training the CPU and the RAM. It identifies what it is. It plugs those settings into itself and restarts with those settings. So you'll see the fan is stopping, and without me touching it, it comes back on again. This is all standard practice across all motherboard manufacturers on a first-time boot with new or changed hardware. Now, in theory, this should take us right into the BIOS because I don't have, well, I rephrase. Let me rephrase, because I still have the SSD in there, which has an incomplete install of Windows 11. I really need to put my Windows 11 flash drive back in, but I want to make sure this thing fires up. It does say a new CPU is installed. Press F1 to continue. That's fine. Okay. And then I really don't want to take it any further than that. I want it to boot to the flash drive. There's probably a newer BIOS available than what we have out of the box here. It is recognizing the 14500 that we put in there. And obviously it recognizes the RAM, or we wouldn't have gotten that far, right? It wouldn't boot if it didn't recognize the RAM. So it seems unlikely we're having a RAM problem, but it still could be because of an incompatibility somewhere that only creeps up during certain process requests. F7, and then back over to boot. And then, oh, this is interesting. It doesn't even see the SSD. Did I not plug it all the way in? Pretty sure I did. Oh, wait. Windows Boot Manager. So it does see the SSD. It doesn't see the flash drive. Oh. Let's just hit Control-Alt-Delete. See what it does. See if it'll boot to the flash drive all by itself. Or you know what? No, I take it back. Let me hit delete again. Maybe the flash drive needed to be plugged in before I went in the BIOS. So let's go back in the BIOS here in just a second. I'm just hitting delete over and over and over again. That's what you're hearing. Tapping. F7, over to boot. Yeah, that's why it didn't show up before. Now we're going to boot off of the flash drive just as we have before. We're going to try, see if we can get Windows 11 installed this time. If we're successful, there's something wrong with the motherboard because nothing else changed. If we're not successful, well, we're back to square one again, but with a little more knowledge than we had before, that can help determine which way we need to continue forward, which, you know, this is the way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. This may be the way. Let's try and see what happens. We'll hit next, install now. I don't have a product key is what I choose at this point because I don't want to waste product keys reinstalling and reinstalling and reinstalling, potentially requiring another product key because it looks like piracy after a while. So wait until your install is done and everything's working. Should have no hurry to activate your product. It's fully functional. We're already further along than we were, but you can see I've gotten this far before, just not consistently. We're going to delete all of these partitions on that SSD. These are our failed Windows 11 installs from before. That last one. Okay, so that's what a brand new SSD would look like, this unallocated space. That's fine. Next. And this is a different SSD than what I started with, but that's okay. It's good enough for our testing. I don't need to put the high performance or more expensive or larger capacity model in because it has nothing to do with getting us the solution to the problem. So that right now is irrelevant. We'll go ahead and see if this installs completely. And you've seen live here on video, live, unscripted, unrehearsed, that I have moved the parts off of one motherboard onto another. I'm not David Blaine. There's no sleight of hand. There's no edits here. I have nothing against or to take out from ASUS. I'm just here to show off their products. And if the products I purchase, thanks to the generosity of many of our members and our community, if those products are being showcased as not working, I don't owe anything to the manufacturer to protect their reputation or to protect mine for that matter. If I screw up and I do something stupid, that's a reflection on me. If they screw up and I have a bad product, that's a reflection on them or in the packaging or the shipping or the distribution. I don't know where the problem is. But so far, I can tell you, we've gotten further, obviously, than we've ever gotten before. And I suspect I was right the whole time. There's something wrong with that original board I bought. Thankfully, those 30-day returns from Amazon means I don't have to pay to ship it back. When you're buying a board for $100, it makes less and less sense to spend more money on it if that's what you have to do to get your money back. And it's going to cost me $20 to $25 to mail back. That's 25% of what I paid for the board. And if the board they send me doesn't work or there's another problem with it, it's another $25 to send it back. As you can imagine, at some point, you'll end up spending more in your time and your money than what you initially spent, at which point it's cheaper to just throw it in the trash can or the recycle bin. So that's why the Amazon return window, that 30-day return window, is so important to me. I know I can send that back. It doesn't cost me a penny. Gregory Howard joins us and says hello. There's Captain Blinsky and Construction Arnold Albert. Ron Barnish and Ben Laird. There's my friend Ron Hillier joining us. Bill Sony T. John Williams. Everybody says hello. Welcome in, everybody. And yeah, I would really like to do my CPU video on seeing what the wattage is being set and how to recognize it, where to look for it, and how to change it. But I can't do that until I have one of each board. So everybody was like good soldiers. The ASRock board installed fine. MSI board installed fine. The Gigabyte board installed fine. Only the ASUS board. That's the one that's holding up the entire project. So take that for whatever it's worth. The ASUS board was probably the cheapest one, weirdly, although it isn't anymore. So again, I'm going to tell it I don't have internet at this point and continue with limited setup. And we'll just put a username of user. I'm very confident this problem is resolved. The only difference would be if anything would change with the latest BIOS installed. So that's possible and easy enough to verify. So we're on BIOS, I think 1101. We can go to the ASUS website. We can grab the latest BIOS, throw it on there, and do another install of Windows and see if it locks up. Once Windows is installed, I'm not exactly sure that that's a reliable way to verify if the lockups are resolved related to the BIOS change. So the only way I would know is to reproduce the problem exactly the same, knowing the lockup occurs during the Windows 11 install, and knowing the only difference remaining between the new board and the previous board was the previous board did have a newer BIOS put on it prior to trying to install Windows 11. This time I installed Windows 11 first. So it's possible a BIOS update creates this problem, even though I did go back one more version just to make sure we didn't get a bad BIOS flash or a corrupted image, which of course really isn't possible because the BIOS itself does a hash check of the validity of the file before it even allows you to accept it. So still, being the skeptic that I am, I want to run through every possible scenario. That's reasonable. I think that's the part where me and the audience sometimes go two different ways. The audience will go off on a tangent that's highly improbable, possible, but improbable, and I won't even entertain it. I'm like, nope, not even. Because even if that were true, it's not worth the amount of time it will take for somebody self-employed with just myself as the one employee to do the work. I just don't have the luxury of going down these rabbit holes for something so insignificant when there's a pile of work right behind this waiting impatiently for me to get to. For example, you might want to watch the video where I showcase the wattage things, but I can't get to that until this is done. And this won't be done until I verify for a fact I've resolved it. So, you know, even you can understand as being a part of this, how that impacts the content you're watching. You might be anxious to get to that next video. I know I am, but now you understand why it's being delayed and there's nothing I can, this is what I have to do. It's not nothing, there's nothing else I can do. I have no choice but to deal with this or drop that video project or change the parameters where I say, here's how you check it for every board manufacturer except ASUS. And then how are ASUS owners going to feel about that? Why are you alienating me, bro? What'd I do to you? You know, what's your problem? It's not my problem. I'm just trying to get things done and they're holding me up, right? So either way you look at it, somebody's affected. So here we are doing what we do. Now, with this shut down, let me go back over here to camera one. And let's go over to the ASUS website. So we'll just go to Google here and we'll type in ASUS Prime B760-PLUS BIOS. And the first link, the Google search will show us, takes us directly to the support page for ASUS. So I can share that with you here. And then under driver and utility here, it says BIOS and firmware. You've got drivers and tools on this side, BIOS and firmware on that side. The latest BIOS is 1646. That's much, much bigger of a number. What do we have, 1101? And if we hit show all, we should probably find 1101 in here. It's one way to tell, oh, 1011 might be what it was. But it's one way to verify you're on the right board. Some boards, they have one little letter designation different in the model name, and you'll download the BIOS for the wrong board, and the board won't accept it. You'll be like, well, something's wrong with it. No, something's wrong with you. You weren't paying attention. So be aware some motherboard manufacturers do that. So I'll go back just to verify. I haven't made that mistake. I've done it several times where you might have a Prime B760-PLUS AX, and that one has Wi-Fi. And it's just that AX designation that requires a different BIOS. And you download the BIOS you think is the right BIOS only to find out it won't accept it. And then you think, well, maybe the BIOS I downloaded is corrupt. No, you downloaded the wrong one. You're on the wrong board. So just look for your previous BIOS version. Whatever version you've got right now, it should be in the list if you're on the right board, somewhere in the history. If it isn't, you should be concerned. All right, now we're going to go ahead and download the 1646 BIOS. And once we have that, we can extract it onto a flash drive over here on the streamer. So let me go back to camera one right here, and then let's grab, I've been using these really inexpensive SAM data drives, and they've been really, really good at any BIOS flashing, BIOS flashback, BIOS update, or firmware update on a TV or a computer monitor. Sometimes the cheap flash drives, they're not recognized by some hardware. But these from SAM Data, which were very inexpensive and have the LED to see that they're doing something, have been 100% solid. So you don't have to use a name brand flash drive. We've already demonstrated that in a previous video where a no-name flash drive simply didn't work to update the BIOS. And then all we did was change the flash drive to a name brand, and then it worked fine. So I've been trying to find a no-name brand that works, and so far, the same SAM data drives have been very inexpensive. They have the LEDs, and they seem to perform, be acknowledged by everything I plugged them into universally without any issues, including the previous, I think it was a motherboard where it wasn't recognizing in the BIOS flashback. These did work for that. I tested it, specifically what I was buying them for. So I've been using these almost universally now for any sort of BIOS or firmware update, just as I would normally use a name brand, just because I really want to test it. Because I know sometimes the name brand stuff is out of the price league for some of you, and these are very, very affordable flash drives. Let me go to my downloads folder, and we'll grab that BIOS update and extract it and copy it over to this flash drive. This will just take a few seconds as I do that now. Yeah, after the show, I can put a link to the SAM data drives that I'm using. They're like $2 a piece or $2.50 a piece. You get 5 of them. And each one's a different color: green, red, black, white. It's the last one. Whatever. I'll put a link to it on it. They're very cheap, very inexpensive. Okay. That's done. And we'll go around here and plug this in. We'll take the Windows 11 flash drive out. Got my SAM data. In case you want to look for yourself, you can find these on Amazon with a search. These are 8 gig drives, 8 gigs a piece. They're not super fast, but a BIOS update is never going to be reliant on how fast your flash drive is. So it's kind of irrelevant for that. And it would make a fine Windows 10 or Windows 11 boot media too. Sure, it may not be as fast as my more expensive SanDisk Extremes. Unless you're doing multiple installs a day, who cares, right? So I have a twisted justification for needing that, right? I can get things done faster and I've got more work waiting, etc. Let me turn this back on. And then let's go back over to our HDMI input. And then back over to delete, delete, delete. Keep hitting delete over and over and over. There we go. F7 is advanced mode. We'll go over to tool because BIOS updating would require a BIOS update tool. And the first option is the ASUS Easy Flash Utility, right? You see that right up here. So we'll hit enter. And it says, let's see what drives you've got. And there's a list of file systems here. This 7663 megabyte, that looks like 8 gigs to me. That's probably our flash drive. And indeed it is. There's only one file on that flash drive, so I don't make any mistakes, right? The flash drive is always kept empty. I put the BIOS update on that flash drive. It warns you if you've got BitLocker turned on, you're not going to be able to see your drive anymore. And it asks you again, you sure you want to do this? And then it asks us again. And then finally, I'm like, yeah, would you just get on with it already? Unlike a lot of people that do this, I know exactly what I'm doing. You don't have to ask me 3 times, but it is what it is. So we're going to allow this to do what it needs to do uninterrupted. We want to leave it alone. Don't mess with your keyboard or mouse. Don't mess with anything. Don't cut the power. If you're impulsive, get up and walk away. Go out, check your mail. I don't know. Start your laundry. Do something to occupy your mind if you are fidgety and you can't sit. Because if you interrupt this, I can almost guarantee it will fail and you will brick the motherboard. And that may not be a warranty issue because you damaged it yourself. So strongly advise, do not take this lightly, but it's not dangerous if you leave it alone. I don't think we've ever had a BIOS update fail on a live video. I'm not even sure I've ever had a BIOS update fail regardless, but I always follow the same precautions and I always get the same outcome. If you don't follow these steps, don't expect to get the same results. Okay, that needs to be said for some viewers. I'm sorry for those of you who don't need to hear that, but this is the reality we live in. Alex Kaufman says hello. There's David Ice, of course. Mara, they're in our chat room, hanging out. There's Mark Gaines, joining us from Northern Ireland, and Barry Klein. Kevin Crowley saying hello. And Jeff Jankowitz. All right, we're getting there. This is about a 3 to 6 minute process, depending on the size of the BIOS. All of that's normal. Doesn't take very long unless you mess with it while it's working. That's the irony of it. Your impatience will make you wait longer, as the expression haste makes waste is quite applicable in much of life, quite frankly, but definitely when updating a BIOS. Ghost Shadow says, when I'm updating a BIOS, I always have the system plugged into a good UPS. I've had power fluctuations, brick motherboards, during a BIOS update. Yeah, and if I had power fluctuations, I would do the same thing, but I don't. Now, this is important, and I want you to pay close attention to this because it's already moved on without me doing anything. It says the system, upon rebooting, it needs to update the Intel Management Engine firmware. And this may be a little confusing because you might be under the assumption, as I was, and don't mind me, well, this says no signal. I'm still here, as you can clearly hear. Let's see if I can put myself back on a corner without us missing what's going on. Okay. BIOS is updating LED firmware. Do not shut down or reset the system, is what it says right now. So we're not done. This is still a hands-off situation. It's rebooting again. It's doing all of this on its own. I'm just a witness, okay? I'm not controlling it. I'm not interfering with it. And I don't know what LED firmware is. It may be referring to the onboard RGB controls and ASUS Aura software. That would be my guess, the ARGB controls, but I'm not sure. I don't think it literally means it's updating LED firmware. Now, this is what's interesting to me. It has taken us back to the BIOS firmware page. It said before that it wanted to update the Windows Management Engine or the Windows ME firmware. Normally, when your firmware is done, it takes you back into the main startup page, the same page we see every time we go in the BIOS. This suggests to me, and I probably would be beneficial for me to read the documentation, but I think the reason it's done this is it wants us to once again update the BIOS, I think, with the same warnings, except this time it's going to update the Intel Management Engine. Yeah, exactly. There it is. There it is. That's exactly what it's doing. Now, you think it would have automated this. So if you thought, okay, I'm back in my BIOS, I'm done, you're not done. You left your BIOS incompletely flashed. Would you like to ask me how I know this? Now, I've never seen any other motherboard manufacturer follow this process ever in my life. updating the ASRock MSI and Gigabyte boards for this project. None of them did this. I've never seen this behavior before. It's quite confusing. And the fact that the BIOS advanced on without me clicking OK with that important information was likely telling me that when we come back into the BIOS, you're going to need to select the BIOS again. But by the time I started reading it, it moved on without my approval. So there's another negative mark for ASUS in that behavior. So if you walked out of the room and came back and your BIOS is back up, you'd think you were done. And in any other make and model of motherboard, you'd probably be correct. But with this one's different than all the others. This one's special. So now, by selecting the same BIOS and going through the same thing, we're getting something different happening, which isn't normally how computers work, by the way. Normally, you click on something, you get a result. But in this case, you get a different result based on what you did prior, even though it's a BIOS. Now it says update successfully. I don't know if they mean updated successfully or update was successful. So we've got bad English on a company that has a North American headquarters, but still uses poor translation services in Asia for their English language. So again, we're going to put another negative check mark on ASUS for not even paying attention or caring enough to pay attention to the details of the being respectful of using the language properly of the country you have a headquarters in. Now, if I'm ordering this off AliExpress, that's a different story. But if you've got a headquarters in North America, you should have fluent English speakers and likely translators who could give us proper English instruction in what is already a very confusing and complex technical area known as the BIOS. That poor English doesn't make that confusing technical area be any clearer for anybody of any level of knowledge. So now, once again, it's like we've turned the system on for the first time, and it's, oh, there's a new BIOS, new chip has been detected. Okay. Now, let me go back to camera 1. And we should verify here that we've got whatever that BIOS version was. 1.6 something. Should tell us, yeah, 646. Right up here. And we're done with this flash drive. We can erase this. We can erase the downloaded flash drive. Once you've done this, you'll never need it again unless you have a fleet that you're working on. We're done with it. It'll get erased. It'll go back in the drawer. And that way, the next time I need to do a BIOS update, I won't be confused over what file to pick. There'll always only be one file on it. Then I don't make any mistakes. All right? These are the tricks of the trade. One thing at a time. Now that we've done all this, now can we reinstall Windows 11 or will we experience the lockup? In other words, did that ME firmware update do something that made one of the parts incompatible, like maybe the RAM? I don't know what else it could be. Or in fact, did I have a bad board? Once again, we don't know. So I'm going to go ahead and shut this off. I'm going to grab my flash drive. Once again, my Windows 11 installation media. We're going to plug it right back in the same USB port just for the sake of consistency. Turn this back on. And then press delete a bunch of times. Get us back in the BIOS, back over to the boot area so I can boot override to that flash drive rather than to the internal storage. All of this just so I can make a video. That's going to be way more complex than this. Oh, I love my job. I love my job. Love my job. Keep telling that. Love my job. Love it. This is what I decided to do for a living because I love it so much. Yes, I do. You believe me yet? Because I'm having trouble. All right, F7. We're to boot. One more time, we're going to do a fresh, clean install of Windows 11. I want to make sure it still installs without the lockup and that the BIOS update, which was the only difference between these two boards, isn't in fact introducing that problem. This is the only way I can know and confidently move forward with certainty that we're fine now and we can move on. I have to know the ground I'm about to step on is firm before I put all my weight on it. I'm a little cautious that way because I've fallen through a few times in my life and it's never fun, and I would like to avoid that from now on. These are the things we've learned when we get older, to be a little bit more cautious, a little bit more skeptical, and a lot more successful even if it does take a little bit more time, it'll end up saving us time in the long run and give us more consistency of results. So again, don't have a product key. So far, so good. I'd say not to jinx myself, but I think it's bad luck to be superstitious. Figure that one. Click OK on that. Delete. Delete. So again, we're just resetting the hard drive back to like new status. So this is what it would look like when it was new out of the box. We've erased all the data, all the partitions, and then we hit next and just let it install. And it should be successful if we haven't broken it with a BIOS update. All right, let me take a look here in the chat while we're waiting for this to process. And you know, back when we installed Windows 3 or Windows 95, Windows 98, we'd have to keep swapping out floppy disks. And it would take, you know, half hour, 45 minutes to get Windows installed. We are spoiled today. So if you feel like, oh, I got to go through another install, please, this is nothing. This is really quick. All right, let's see. Joe Martin says, I'm glad I saw this install. Now I'll be on the lookout. The Easy says, ASUS Prime motherboards are not so good quality products. It's a little better than basic. Well, ASUS used to be known for their quality and their high prices. They were often, in my mind, I would relay them in such a way as to describe it as like Pepperidge Farm products here in the USA. Pepperidge Farm products are usually very delicious, whatever they are. They're also very expensive, but you get what you pay for. And I've always likened ASUS to Pepperidge Farm in that they were expensive, but they were good. Now they're not so expensive and maybe not so good. Something's changed in the management of the company, apparently, with regards to the priority of value or quality. I'm not sure, but clearly something's changed. It's not like it used to be, not in a good way. Al Hedge renews his membership, now a member for 16 months here on the channel. Thank you, Al Hedge, for supporting the channel. Go Shadow said it was 13 3.5-inch floppy disks to install Windows 3.11. And then I think it was 5 more floppy disks for 3.11 for workgroups. Those were the good old days, huh? Oystein says, too bad Amazon will not sell SAM data USB drives to Norway. I'm sure I could put some in the mail to you. Probably cost more to mail them, but you know, there's probably something equivalent. It doesn't have to be just SAM data. It's just the brand I've tested. It's all a luck of the draw. I didn't seek them out. Dustin says hello. Sarah says hello. Taffer says hello. Starshine says hello. Choppa says hello. Rick Lakes says hello from Minnesota. Oystein says LED control may have a firmware. Seems that way, doesn't it? Let's see what else. Does anybody have any questions for me while we're patiently waiting for our Windows install to finish? Of course, once that's done, I can safely connect it to the internet and download any Windows 11 updates. I just got to make sure that we're going to complete this process as we did before, just to know with confidence that we should be good to go. This is what I expected when I took the first board out of the box. This was the experience I was looking forward to. And because of that, the number of steps that had to be taken as a consequence have led us to where we are right now, and why the video that I was attempting to make has not yet begun production, because I didn't have everything I needed to start production. So after this video, I should have everything I need, other than the time to make the video. But at least that'll be on me. Hey, there's Frankie B. Hey, Frankie, thank you again for the Amazon gift card the other day. I'm sorry I didn't catch that during the live show to say thank you, but now that I see you there, I can say it directly to your avatar. We'll have an avatar off. Oystein, Frankie B, and our friend Buster in Scotland have been very generous contributors here, enabling us to even make this project to begin with. So, proper credit where credit's due. John says, I'm thinking of starting my own computer repair shop as inspired by your YouTube channel. Well, you might be a little late to the game in that, as everybody in the consumer space is switching over to smartphones and tablets, and those are far more complicated to repair. However, if you want it to be a managed service provider, someone who goes to businesses and maintains their infrastructure, there's lots of opportunity for that. It pays better and the income's more regular. So if I were to give you any advice, it'd be don't get into generic computer repair, but rather service businesses. And whatever computers the business has, become an expert on those, because that's all you'll be working on. They'll keep you busy and provide you with a much more regular income, resulting in you not spending as much for advertising or marketing and trying to knock on a bunch of doors. So you can get one more home customer that calls you once every 14 months. You can't live off of that. Especially, like I say, as home consumers are generally moving to smartphones and tablets, portable devices. There's plenty of videos on becoming an MSP, along with books and others if you want to follow up with that. Okay, Armory Crate software. Yes, so this will put our drivers in for us so we don't have to hunt the drivers down. So if you notice, if I right-click and go to Device Manager, we're going to have a bunch of devices here that are unrecognized by Windows 11. By default, it doesn't know what these are. So we can go to the motherboard manufacturer and download those drivers if we know what they are, or we can use the utility provided by the manufacturer. They all do this. Gigabyte, MSI, ASRock, and ASUS all do this. They have a different name for it. But essentially, the BIOS update now includes this feature that the prior BIOS didn't do. That's why we didn't see this before on the older BIOS. So what it's going to do is reach out to the ASUS servers and grab their detection software for drivers. Now, some manufacturers unscrupulously will add trial software. So you don't just click things blindly, pay attention to what you're clicking on. I think ASUS, I probably should see it before I say anything, but I think they still like to put Norton antivirus trial on your computer, which is, it's an infection in and of itself. There's no way you can get it completely back off of your system. When you want to install it, it leaves a lot of remnants behind in your file system and your Windows directory and your registry. It'll never be completely removed. So the best course of action is never install it. Not that completely removing it is necessary, right? Those little remnants laying around aren't necessarily hurting anything, but they're definitely not helping. And even though they may not have any consequence today, you don't know how many remnants you can leave behind from how many other software installs you're going to remove throughout the usage of the computer, throughout the days and weeks and months and years ahead, where eventually you run into a conflict and the computer has to be wiped and reinstalled. So one of the key factors of reliability is to leave things alone. And if you want to experiment, that's fine. Just make sure you do a full system image with something like Acronis, so you can go back in time to undo all those installs and all those remnants that would have never been there by restoring a full image backup when you're done, if you end up uninstalling and you don't like it. On the other hand, if you do like it, you plan on keeping it, make another full image backup so you don't have to repeat the process again on a restore. Our friends over at Acronis only have 2 days left of that 50% off, 50. 1/2 off the cost of Acronis 1-year subscription. You don't even have to use my coupon code. You just go to acronis.com, as far as I know. That's good till tomorrow, Sunday, April 14th, 2024. Just saying, heck of a deal. I think it's a heck. Don't mind me while I'm still learning to talk. I think it's a heck of a deal at its full retail price. Half off. I don't know how you make it better than a heck of a deal. A he of a deal. A CK of a deal. It's half of heck. I don't know. It's a good deal. And Acronis has a free trial, so you don't have to buy it to evaluate it. However, if it takes you more than tomorrow to evaluate it, the sale price, you can always get it here for 30% off using our coupon code. But their deal at 50, at 50% off is temporary. Our deal at 30% off is anytime you want it throughout the rest of the year. No, I don't want to pressure you to go and get it, just if you want to save money. Who wants that? My internet here is pretty slow. This is not a very big download, so don't let that dissuade you from, if you see this, from installing it. Your internet is likely much, much faster than mine here. Choppa wants to know, is the overclocking being applied to laptops with a 12th gen Intel chip? As far as I can tell, and I don't know precisely the answer, but so far as I can tell, when the manufacturers are selling you something they've already built, it's already been tested and thoroughly for their warranty that it's not going to burn it out. But when manufacturers are selling you parts that you can put together, any chip with any board, with any RAM, with any SSD, that's usually where the problems occur. The boards are all going to overclock. Even when you buy a 14500, which is not an overclockable chip, it's being overwatted. It's being boosted through throwing more power at it. Even on a B760, which is not an unlocked motherboard, this is a Z. If it was a Z790 with a K or KS or KF processor, you'd say, well, of course, Carey, that's what they do. You wouldn't expect that to happen on on a locked chip like the 14500. Has no K after it. I think we just went to sleep, did we? Yeah. Okay, so let me change those sleep settings so it doesn't do that again. Edit power plan, and we'll just change this to 3 hours. We want to deal with that for a while. Yeah, so you should be fine with any mini PCs or laptops, tablets. Like I say, those manufacturers who make those, they have to warranty them. They obviously don't want to sell you something that's going to burn up and then have to spend money to replace it, or they're going to go out of business and they're going to ruin their reputation. But when you're building something yourself and you're mixing and matching parts, this tends to be where the problems come from. Unfortunately, this problem was completely avoidable and is a direct result of reviewers. Motherboard manufacturers are doing whatever they can to manipulate the reviews so their product seems superior, and it's clearly been working, unfortunately. It's a pretty underhanded thing to do, and I sure as heck hope that Intel will put their foot down on this. If they don't, if Intel just lets it slide as they have been, then at least know that moving forward from 15th gen on, we're moving to chiplet-based CPUs, which you can't do this to. So one way or the other, the problem seems to be of the time we're living in. Right? So if this was a problem that affected 5th, 6th, and 7th generation Intel CPUs, you'd roll your eyes at me right now and go, who the hell cares? But if you're watching this video as it's airing live in 2024, you probably care greatly. So one way or another, this problem gets resolved in the future. But one way or the other, if you own a modern generation Intel chip within the last 3 years, you're likely suffering the consequences of this, whether or not you realize it. And it doesn't necessarily mean a negative outcome for everyone, but it likely does result in, at the very least, a degraded CPU that will degrade much more quickly. The question is whether or not you're ever impacted by it, depending on how long you keep the computer and how you use the computer and how it's being overvolted specifically by your board. So there's just a lot of variables there, but enough people are being affected that it's raising awareness on the issue. And certainly Intel is aware of it. And I can't wait to see what Intel forensics come up with. I am a little concerned at how long this is taking. This is ridiculously a long time. This isn't that big of an application. All this is the application that's going to check the drivers. This isn't the drivers. So this should have been done a long time ago. I don't know, like even as slow as my internet is here, it shouldn't be taking this much time. It has me concerned. But I'm afraid, again, haste makes waste. And if I try to speed it up by just saying, never mind, I'll do it myself, it'll actually take me longer than if I just leave it alone. So while we're waiting, it's a good time for us to interact. If you have any questions for me, I'll do my best to provide answers. Joe Martin joins us as a supporter. Right on. Thank you, Joe. Thank you for helping keep us from becoming a shill or a puppet for a manufacturer who will compensate us so we can pay to make these videos. These videos are not free to make. There's a huge investment in the studio. Clearly not in the internet connection, but that's a different story for a different day. As long as we have viewers like you that are willing to help us pay for what it takes to make these videos, we have an endless stream of videos to make. It's not like we're running out of ideas. We just run out of money or we run out of time. And 2024 is a tight year. It's going to be a tight year. Many of you probably feeling the crunch. And we're going to keep going no matter what, even if it means reducing the amount of content. But we're not going anywhere. And hopefully, as long as the funding and the time is there, as I mentioned, we've got no shortage of content to make. Now, the Armory Crate software just finished, and we're going to see here, as it scans the system, it should, obviously you got to give it permission, of course. And we have to give it permission again. Okay, apparently that was just the download. But the install, now that we're local, should happen rather quickly. All right, so while we're waiting, back over to the chat. A to Z Tech, I just had to send back a Gigabyte B760 DS3H AX motherboard, as it was dead out of the box. It wouldn't post or get BIOS. Well, we do everything live here, and we've certainly opened a share of motherboards. I don't recall ever getting one DOA. So it's always hard to tell if it's bad luck, or maybe you have a delivery driver that likes to drop kick boxes to your front door. I find that there are some people who experience more product failures than others, and my theory is those people have somebody in their delivery chain, that last mile they call it, that is improperly handling the boxes without any care. And as a result, they're going to say, well, every time I order from this company, everything's always broken. And I'm saying every time I order from the company, I've never seen anything broken. We're ordering the same things from the same company. Why are you getting products constantly broken and mine are constantly working? And I don't think it has to do with the company or the manufacturer. I think it has to do with the delivery service. So it's just a theory, and take that for whatever it's worth. Pretty unusual to receive a DOA electronic product these days, unless it was mishandled at some point. But it still happens. It's just not as common as it used to be. Jet said, I've noticed AM5 chips have a custom CPU contact frame plate, which is made by Thermalright. We showcased both the AM5 and the Socket 1700 Thermalright contact frames. I think they're a complete waste of money, but they look cool, and I like putting them on. I think it's fun. And they're also like $8 or $9. So it's not like it's a lot of wasted money, but it's really a waste of money. And of course it looks cool, but when you put the heatsink on, you can't see it anyway. So no one would ever know. So, to each their own. Most thermal compound isn't conductive, and it wouldn't matter if it spilled over. I can't recall ever opening a computer here on camera live where we've seen a spillover that needed cleanup. I'm sure it must have happened in the past, but it doesn't, aside from being messy and looking ugly, it's not hurting any. The reason for the contact frame is really for Intel's rectangular shaped chips that supposedly can warp a bit over time if they're being overvolted and overheated. And that would reduce the contact area between the top of the internal heat spreader and the bottom of the heatsink. As a result, it's not something the human eye can detect, but you will notice higher and higher temperatures as the CPU starts to warp in a detection that would require a machine that can measure that. The human eye can't measure it. But the idea behind the contact frame is it keeps the pressure level and prevents the center of the chip from bending. On a Ryzen chip, it's perfectly square on all sides. All sides are the same length, and that way it would not bend in the middle that way. So it doesn't have this particular potential. Thermal Thermalright wants you to buy their products, and they'll tell you whatever you need to hear within law to convince you to spend your money with them. And look, you know, even if it's a placebo, even if it's just an aesthetic, as long as you're happy and satisfied in how you spent your $10, don't let me get in your way. We've installed a few of them here. And in fact, that's another video that I want to make, which is showing the difference of an Intel Socket 1700 chip running under stress with and without the contact frame to see if it makes any difference in our temperatures. I think if it does, it won't be more than about 3 degrees tops, 3 degrees Celsius. And I mean, if 3 degrees Celsius makes any difference in your world, I think something's wrong. Like something, if 3 degrees is all the difference you need, it doesn't sound like you've got something configured right or installed correctly, or you put an inadequate cooler on your CPU. I don't know, $10 to save 3 degrees doesn't seem like a good deal to me. And that's pinnacle, that's the top maximum I think you might see. It's just my opinion as a professional technician, so, you know, they do look cool. I agree, they look cool. And I like putting them on. I do, I think it's fun. But slapping a heatsink on it, you're not gonna see it. No one knows it's there but you. All right. Zaylan says Thermalright has some great coolers, though, like the Peerless Assassin, which is highly competitive with the Noctua. I've heard they're very inexpensive. They're like $30. They seem like a really good deal. But I haven't, they haven't sent me any for review, and I haven't purchased any. But I've heard nothing but good things. Scott says he uninstalled the Armory Crate. He didn't like the way it was trying to control his RGB. His case, cooler, fan, and RAM are all different manufacturers, and it just works better without trying to control it. Sure. Well, I imagine, depending on who the manufacturers are, someone could say just the opposite, say how much easier Armory Crate made it. So to each their own. But I appreciate your perspective for sure, because it's a valid one based on the parts you selected. Zaylan says, indeed, Thermaltake are cheap and have an easy install process. Very good. Ron Toomey says, what's your experience with Intel versus AMD longevity? Which customer PCs have you built with Intel or AMD have lasted the longest? Well, it's kind of an unfair question, because you have to understand we're not just buying a CPU. We're buying motherboards, storage, RAM, power supplies, cases. And as a result, a lot of times when systems come in for repair, the problem is never, very rarely, I should say, the CPU. So if you look here on the channel under CareyHolzman Repair, I think you'll find a lot more AMD systems come in for repair than Intel systems. And you can do the math and just look. I think if you look for computer repair on Reddit and you look at the number of questions being asked by AMD owners versus Intel owners, you're going to see a lot more AMD owners asking questions. However, one could argue that AMD sells more consumers their chips than Intel does. Intel's more of a business-oriented chip. AMD's more of a gaming consumer-oriented chip. And therefore, the enthusiasts who buy them are more likely to be more internet savvy when asking the questions and fixing their own problems. And there may be more of them out there. So if there's 100,000 AMD chips, and that's a low number, but I'm just using an example because the enthusiasts say 65% or 60% of the enthusiasts are buying the AMD chips, then that means there's more AMD chips than Intel chips in that environment. So if the same failure rate applies, if say 3% of all AMDs fail and 3% of Intel's fail, but all you're seeing mostly are AMDs, it may be because 3% of a bigger number is going to result in what appears to be a higher failure rate when in fact it's still 3% across the board. What I'm getting at is the information you're looking for is so insignificant and minute as to be negligible. With regards to longevity, it depends on the environment it's in, how it's being treated, how it's being used. and what the expectations of the customer are, and what quality of components were paired with it. Did you buy the cheapest possible motherboard from AliExpress, and then you're going to blame AMD or Intel on the failure that occurs? So sometimes the consumers make decisions that harm themselves and blame the manufacturers, which is just a way of protecting yourself, I suppose, from accepting responsibility for the decisions that you made. Ultimately, I don't really think it makes any difference. As long as it has a warranty that's honored by the manufacturer, I don't think anything beyond warranty is any concern. So we're going to reopen the app, I guess, is what we need to do here. Finally, with the app installed, and remember, I don't have to keep the app installed. If I even just use it just to put the drivers in, just to save me the effort. This isn't something I would normally stare at. Rather than go to the website and download the drivers, which I could have already done, I could be watching television and just pop back in here and let this take as much time as it wants and just be lazy and let it do it for me, even though it takes longer. So we've got our end user license agreement, which we have to scroll to the bottom of before it lets us click agree. And I'm going to skip the Aura wallpaper, although it is kind of cool. I will admit their Aura wallpaper is fun. But I'll skip that for now just so we can get to the, let's cancel that and get to our drivers section. This is dashboard, information on the CPU. Somewhere in here, remember, I'm not familiar with ASUS and their software. So just don't mind me as I fidget around in here looking for, skip that. I think it was right here with the screwdriver and the wrench. Drivers. Okay, Intel chipset driver, we want that. Rapid storage technology, yes. Serial I/O, yes. This is going to take care of all those device manager issues. I don't see Norton or any other trial software here. Let's look over at utility. I don't want any utilities. I don't want the manuals. So yeah, just that. Perfect. Download and install. Once again, I could go watch TV. I can do something else versus without the software, I would go to Windows Update. Windows Update isn't going to have some of these drivers. So I'd still have to go back to the motherboard manufacturer's website and get those drivers manually. After doing this, I can just walk away from it, let it do it on its own. It can take minutes or hours. What do I care? I got other things to do. And when I come back, that's one less thing. All I have to do is reboot. And that process is done for me. So you can see the benefit. Somebody like me who's got 8 million things going on at the same time. If something doesn't require my personal attention and time, but it can run without me, and I need that process to complete, I can start some other process elsewhere. Well, because there's always something else waiting behind it. And the sooner I can get to it, the more money I can make, the happier the customer who's waiting is going to be, the happier the person behind that person is going to be. Get to them sooner, the more money I can make, the happier I am. Everybody's happy. Glenn's Music says from start to finish that Armory install took 20 minutes. That's interesting. Thank you for measuring that. I, again, would normally not really care. I would just step out of the room. I could go to the grocery store. I could run errands. I can do laundry. I can wash dishes. I could sweep the floor. I could take the garbage out. I can bring the cans out to the curb or bring the cans in from the curb. And I can go check the mail and I can return emails. And I mean, there's so much I have to do. It wouldn't matter to me how long this takes. I would just, whenever I had a break from getting to a stopping point on one of those errands or missions, I'd just poke my head in here and look at the screen and see if it's done. I could even do this remotely on client machines where I log in remotely, hit the update button, and then disconnect so I don't take up any bandwidth. That way it'll process without me there. And after, whenever an opportunity opens up after a period of time, I can log back in remotely and see if we're ready for a restart or if it's still processing. What do I care? I got other things to do. So I would estimate the 20 minutes is likely due to my poor internet performance here. But I'm not going to do it again. And I don't have a better internet to test it, but I can't imagine that's normal. Unless you have a slow internet like I do. All right, let's see what else you guys got going on in the chat. Is there much money to be made during computer repair anymore? It seems like computers are pretty much disposable commodities these days. Well, it depends what kind of computers you're repairing. If you're repairing computers in a nuclear facility, I think you'll find it pays quite well, or a hospital or medical clinic or lawyer's office, doctor's office, accountant. These are important computers, especially for accountants during tax season here in America. If the system goes down, they can't help their customers. They're already busy. Everybody's waiting till the last minute. They're under a lot of pressure. And then more and more customers are piling on as the deadline nears. So it's quite stressful for a lot of people in a lot of these industries. As such, they don't have time to shop around. If they know you're trustworthy, or you come as a referral, or they've got experience working with you, they'll pay your reasonable fee. And yes, you can make money. Whether or not you make money isn't something other people decide. If you have a defeatist attitude and you're looking for an excuse to not do it, that's what a defeatist does. And that's the kind of person that should work for somebody else. An entrepreneur, somebody who really has a drive to be self-employed, won't think that way. The only way you think is, how am I going to succeed today? That's it. The option of failure does not interfere with the progress of positivity, and you manifest and you create what does not exist through your sheer stubbornness and belief of making it happen. But if you're spending time thinking about all the reasons why it won't happen, with that defeatist attitude, you're very unlikely to be successful for any sustainable period of time, because you're your own worst enemy. And it's something you simply cannot afford to do if you're Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk, or, if you're an innovator. You have to know that you're taking risks. Other people are going to tell you you're wasting your time and you can't do it. And then if you're successful, you're going to prove everyone wrong. As Bezos did when Amazon only sold books, as Elon Musk did with the electric car and landing rockets. Everybody said that couldn't be done, and he did it. And what's funny to me is, no matter what these two guys do, they get the same exact response. You can't do that. It's like they don't even consider you already thought they couldn't do what they've already done. At some point, you should get the clue that if they say they're going to do it, it's probably a safe investment to invest in, because these are the kind of people that are going to go down with the ship. They're not going to take your money and bolt. They're going to spend their own money, and they're going to go down with that ship. That's a person I would invest in. It doesn't mean they're always going to be successful, but they'll always find a way, even if it means they have to adjust the plans or replace a related project, or maybe even an unrelated project, in order to sustain. That is the only way to achieve a level of success, unless you just have a golden touch and things just happen to you that you didn't even ask for, with opportunities, and you're just there accepting it and saying yes versus saying no. Still requires a positive attitude. But yes, if you don't think there's no, if you think there's no money in repair, you're right. And if you think you can get rich in repair, you're also right. That's really up to you. Just remember, the people that ran Sears and J.C. Penney and all those, Kmart, they were very successful for a time. They did not go out of business because of Amazon or Walmart. Amazon and Walmart didn't do anything they couldn't do. They just refused to do it. And that's why they're not around anymore. So it wasn't a matter of what was possible. It was simply a matter of attitude and pivoting and being flexible in order to stay in business. They weren't willing to. Amazon and Walmart were. And then there'll be somebody else who comes along and Amazon and Walmart will become the Kmart and Sears of the future. No one company lasts more than about 100, 150 years tops. I think Beretta, the weapons manufacturer, is the oldest company in the world, which I believe is still family owned and is over 500 years old. That's unheard of, absolutely unheard of. So every day as a business owner, all you're trying to do is keep your business alive. It's always trying to kill itself every day. And your job as a business owner to just keep it alive another day. It's very stressful, but also can be very rewarding if you allow it to be. Blackjack Yak says, I did not know about Beretta. Wikipedia that. You can, yeah, I have the facts wrong. Fact check me. Starshine says, I have to give up fizzy drinks. My doctor tells me the sweetness nukes the stomach's microbiome. Well, the problem with medicine is its practice. You do know that, right? And this is both a good thing and a bad thing. And what that means is that if you're getting information from a doctor that you don't want to hear, you can always pick another doctor. And that doctor may agree, but to a lesser extent, to a lesser extreme with the other doctor, or may oppose the other doctor entirely, saying, well, that doctor's worried about you drinking fizzy drinks. I'm worried about the fact that you seem to be bleeding out of your jugular vein onto my floor, and you're likely going to die. So, well, your doctor's looking so closely at something that doesn't matter. The bigger picture shows there's a bigger problem here. So if you ever hear information that you don't necessarily want to hear from your doctor, there's a reason why the term getting a second opinion exists. And the same is true with any major repair, like getting a new roof on the house, or maybe you've been in an accident and there's a couple of repair shops. Get some quotes. And of course, always look up the Yelp ratings or the Google ratings and reviews before you make a decision on who to go to for that second opinion. And maybe if it's been a while, look up those reviews on who you're currently seeing, because things may have changed. Things may have gotten better. Things may have gotten worse. Okay, so now we're doing our first reboot after automating our driver install, which again normally wouldn't take this long. There's nothing normal about that, but likely related to my internet connection. But it also gave me an excuse to let the machine continue running with the stock fan, just to make sure we don't have any more lockup issues that are going to happen. This is a great benchmarking test while also getting something done that needed to be done. Sort of killing two birds with one stone, as the expression goes. Although why you would have a shortness of stones, I don't quite understand when there was ever a stone shortage. But anyway, I overthink that. David Ice talks about the calories in Coke and Pepsi, but some people drink water and don't realize how much of microplastics are in the water from the bottle it comes in or from the packaging, and you think you're doing something healthy when you're poisoning yourself. So who knows? Who knows? Growing up, they told us margarine was healthier than butter. Then they switched back and said butter was healthier than margarine. And then they said that wine was bad for you, alcohol was bad for you. But then they said one glass of wine was good for you. But then they said, no, no, it isn't. And they, you know, it's medicine. They really don't know. Everything's mostly theory and statistics. Everybody's microbiology is slightly different. The environment we live in and the air we breathe is all varying, and stresses that we're under affect our health as well. So who's to say what's right and what's wrong at this stage of our evolution? It's no guarantees, and you can still do all the right things and get hit by a car. You know what I mean? You can still suffer an unexpected aneurysm just through your genetics or through the environment you live in. So we enjoy and appreciate each and every day, and you know, having the ability to take a warm shower or a hot shower is something the wealthy kings of the past never had. And yet almost all of us have that available to us, and almost none of it recognize how lucky we are to have such a luxury at the turn of a dial that our ancestors would have never even thought or dreamed of having. So sometimes it's important to take a step back. Just think about how people lived 100 years ago, 200 years ago. And if you go further back than that, the appreciation only goes up further. It's pretty special when somebody's saying that's better than sliced bread, that to think that there was a time when there was no such thing as sliced bread. You had to slice it yourself. And automating that process where it was getting sliced was so special. People were like, wow, that is the greatest thing. And then the next thing that was the greatest thing, people would say, that's the greatest thing since sliced bread. When in your life was sliced bread not an option? We've got it good now. We really do. Okay. We're still getting Windows updates here, but everything looks really happy. And if our driver update did its job, well, this is checking one more time for more updates. I'll right-click on the Start menu, go to the Device Manager, and make sure that everything is happy. And it does look, indeed, happy. Okay, finally, I think that'll wrap up today's video, because that means I can move forward now with the prepped ASRock MSI Gigabyte ASUS boards on the whole voltage thing that kicked off this whole series of what keeps me up at night for the last 2 weeks. On to the next prop. Next, I need a bell. Ding! Bring in another victim of industrial disease. Ron Toomey wants to know, is Windows 11 easy to get coming from Windows 10, or does it take some time? It kind of depends on how fast your computer is, how many processes you've got running, how much drive space you've got, how fast your internet connection is, how much RAM you have. But generally speaking, you can get it automatically through Windows Update or using the Windows 11 Installation Assistant. And it will take what it takes. On average, I would say anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour and 20 minutes would be normal, depending on your individual system configuration, as well as the variables that I've mentioned prior. All will have an impact. For one person, it'll take 20 minutes, and for somebody else, it'll take over an hour. But it is a free upgrade from Windows 10, and you can force it by using the Windows 11 Upgrade Assistant. If we wanted to find that, we would just open up our browser, and we would simply type that into our search engine. So here, because I've never started this before, I have to go through this nonsense. And when Microsoft wants to know why I prefer Chrome over Bing, this is why. Bing doesn't make me go through, Chrome doesn't make me go through all of these required answers before I can start. I just want to skip all. Just don't even bother me. I don't want to have to uncheck a box and confirm. This is where I wanted to be 45 seconds ago. And the fact that you forced me into this is why I choose Chrome. Chrome does not do that to me. They're more respectful of the value of my time. Now that it's done, Windows 11 Installation Assistant. And one of the very first links should be from Microsoft. You want to get it from Microsoft. We can see where it's coming from right here, www.microsoft.com. That's not faked. If it was English Microsoft or Microsoft.something.com, I'd be suspect. And this is an accurate search result. That's what I want. Now, because we already have Windows 11, we don't need this assistant. But if you're running Windows 10 and you want to force that Windows 11 install, assuming your computer meets the requirements, and it will check before it installs, you simply download this Windows 11 installation assistant right there and hit the download now button. That's all there is. It's pretty simple. And you should have the ability to uninstall it within 30 days, I think, or 15 days if you want to roll back to Windows 10. Or, what I think is even better, make an Acronis True Image backup, or Acronis Cyber Protect is what they call it today. Do a system image backup before installing Windows 11, and you can always restore back to Windows 10 without any time limit. And you don't have to worry about all the remnants I talked about earlier. They get left behind in any product uninstall. Ron said he was asking about how long it takes to get used to it. Once again, it's like anything else. How long will it take you to learn how to play a piano? It's going to take people of varying skill, people of varying past experience with other, perhaps reading music or playing other instruments or lack thereof, a determinate amount of time based on how willing they are to want to learn. If somebody does not want to learn, if somebody's coming at it with a bad attitude, it's going to take them longer. So I can't predict how long it will take somebody I don't know on the internet asking me without knowing anything about their past experience or their natural inclinations that they're born with, if it'll be something very simple for them or if it will be a frustrating experience. That's something you have to share with me. And then when I hear from viewers what their experience is positive or negative, I can get an evaluation that's anecdotal based on the audience we attract. Overall, more people say this than that. But asking me what you're going to say, you have to tell me what you're going to say. All right. I think we're all caught up here. And now that I know everything works, I can go and buy a product key on VIP CDK deals. You see, if I had activated that product key on the prior motherboard because I was impatient and I just assumed everything was going to work out okay, and then it ended up locking up after the Windows install, that product key stays tied to the motherboard. So I would have just burned away $16 or whatever it is. And, lesson learned. Okay, that's not their fault you did that. It's not their fault you were too anxious and you installed it too soon. Make sure everything's working the way it's supposed to. Don't rush it through. Then go buy your $16 product key. It ties to the motherboard. You cannot move it. It's part of the reason why it's so cheap. It'll stay with the motherboard for life. So unless you change the motherboard, you should not ever have to buy another product key for Windows 10 or Windows 11. The Windows 10 product key is cheaper and works to activate Windows 11, even if Windows 10 was never installed. Windows 11 will treat the Windows 10 product key as though it were a Windows 11 product key because it's a free upgrade. As long as you're not going from home to pro or pro to home, it's got to be a home to home scenario, pro to pro. And then you'll save money because a Windows 11 Pro key costs more than a Windows 10 Pro key. So why would you spend more money if you don't have to? And then, of course, use the coupon code CAREY to save 30% off. And, of course, our friends at Acronis, one more time, just to remind you, 50% off, half off their product until tomorrow. And a shout out to our friends at RoboForm. That's the password manager that I use. I've been using it for nearly 2 decades. I don't know how I would live without it. If you don't use it or you don't know what it is, I don't even know how you get by through the day knowing what your logins and passwords are for everything, because there's no way I could keep track of it all. And with RoboForm, I don't have to. And I can put RoboForm on every mobile device and every desktop, on my phone, my tablet, anywhere I want it. There's no extra charge for that. Put it on 3 devices, 1 device, or 300 devices. It's all included in the license. So it's very handy. All right. Did I miss any? I probably missed contributions, huh? Let me check the phone here real quick, and we'll start wrapping things up for today. Appreciate you joining me on this spontaneous broadcast today. Let's see what we've got here. $50 Amazon gift card comes from Cape Missile. He says, Carey, great content today. I hope this helps defray some of the cost. I'm a grateful subscriber and member. Well, I am grateful back at you. Thank you for helping support us here. That helps more than you, maybe more than you know. And again, I usually spend the money at Amazon. So getting the Amazon gift card is great because Amazon doesn't take any commission out of it the way YouTube takes your, they take 30% out of any of your super chats. They take 30% out of your membership fees. And then they make me wait 30 to 60 days before they pass that money on to me. The Amazon gift cards are instantaneous, and I'm probably spending the money at Amazon anyway. So right on. Thank you for doing that. Richard Palmentier has a question. I was wondering, I have a Gigabyte H610 S2H DDR4 motherboard. Would an ATX board, instead of a micro ATX board, would that be a good upgrade? It would give me 2 more RAM slots. The 2 I have are the Corsair Vengeance LPX DDR4 RAM, 32 gig. I'm wondering about your thoughts on this. I know it'll be up to me, but he wants my thoughts on it. Okay, well, let's take a quick look at the board he's got, because he's making some assumptions here that are quite common from non-technical people or people new in this arena, this technical arena. And what he's assuming is that all micro ATX boards have 2 memory slots, which would be true if it was an ITX, a mini ITX motherboard. But on micro, not mini, but on micro ATX boards, they do make micro ATX boards with 4 slots. So let's take a look at what he's got. So if we go to, let's go to Amazon just for the sake of going. So let's not do that. Okay, let's just do a search for the H610M S2H DDR4. That should only be made by Gigabyte. That's a trademarked name that ASUS and ASRock and MSI can't use. So I didn't need to put the word Gigabyte any more than I have to put the word Chevy in front of the word Camaro. It's a trademarked product name. Or I wouldn't have to say Ford before Mustang. If I talk about a Mustang, only Ford makes it. At least if you know I'm referring to the car. Anyway, he's got this board that he purchased that has 2 memory slots. That's micro ATX. And that means the board is going to have basically a limited number of PCIe slots here. See, he's got 1 slot here and another smaller slot down here. And the board is smaller. Some cases won't allow for a board any bigger than that. So if he's got a full-size ATX case and he bought a micro ATX board, then he's got a case that has a lot of empty space in it. On the other hand, when you're buying a board strictly because of the number of memory sockets you have, to me, it's an unwise move because it's just cheaper, faster, easier, more efficient, more optimized to simply buy 2 different RAM modules. So for example, if he's got right now 32 gigs of RAM, I'm going to assume that both of these sticks are 16, okay? So if we wanted to just take a quick look at, we'll go to Newegg since they won't do what Amazon just did there. And we look for how much is 32 gigs of DDR4. We'll just do that quick search. And then we'll sort it by lowest price first. Now, if we go with exactly, he's got Corsair Vengeance, which was, I think, one of the first things that, if I go back, I think, oh no, that's Team. Not that the manufacturer really matters, but we can certainly add the word Vengeance and see what that comes up with. So 32 gigs of RAM is $68. So what if we doubled that to 64 gigs of RAM? Would we be doubling the price? 68 and 68 would be $136. How much is 64 gig, everything else being the same? Yeah, it's about twice the price, as opposed to replacing the motherboard, which is going to cost over $100, probably cost more than the RAM. You simply take your 16 gigs, your two 16s out and replace it with two 32s. But this is another mistake I continually see consumers making, and they get caught up with watching too many videos and reading too many articles online to buy things that they don't need, that waste their money, that waste their time, that ultimately take a perfectly good working computer and potentially break it. And then I get the call for how come it's not working, when if they'd have left it alone, it would have been just fine. So to give you an example, we don't know that Richard even needs the 32 gigs of RAM he's got. So if, let's say you've got a full tank of gas, but the only place you're going to drive to, the only place you're planning to go is to the market at the end of the street. Do you need a full tank of gas to go to the market at the end of the street? Could you do that on a quarter tank of gas? Could you do that on an eighth a tank of gas? So all this gas that's sitting in your tank is giving you no benefit whatsoever. It's just sitting there not being used. Unused RAM is the same as not having it. So if you have 32 gigs of RAM that you're not using all of it, and you want to double that to 64, and your thought is, I want to buy 2 more sticks of 32, what you've also done is you've added 2 sticks of RAM where you could have had a 50-50 chance of a RAM failure. But now you've doubled the amount of RAM you have. So instead of 2 sticks of RAM that can go bad, you now have 4 sticks of RAM that can go bad. Then you have the generated heat of all those RAM modules right next to each other. By doubling the RAM, you essentially come pretty close to doubling the heat. You're also drawing more power from the power supply because each one of those RAM modules requires power. So when you double the RAM, you're doubling the amount of power consumption. Now, if you're going to change your motherboard out to do this, what do you do with the old board? Well, I'd argue if you change the RAM out, what are you going to do with the old RAM? One way or the other, you're left with old parts. But then I'd ask, why? Why are you asking me this question? And this is a key if you want to be a computer technician. Instead of just blindly answering a customer's question, the first question you need to control how much time the customer is potentially wasting because it has nothing to do with whatever it is they're trying to accomplish. So my question becomes, never mind your question. I want to know why you think you need to add more RAM. What problem are you trying to solve? Because it may not be a solution that has anything to do with RAM. I'll give you an example. A very common thing that I ran into a few years ago was I had people that were wanting to upgrade their 100 megabit network cards to gigabit network cards. And they'd call with, I don't know how to get the driver. Which one is the best one to buy? And I get myself caught up in this, what to me is a complete waste of time. It's like a snare, a trap, it's bait. And then ultimately, after I've answered all their questions, they call again with another question and they say, well, how come my internet isn't any faster now? Hold on, are you telling me all of this time that I've spent educating you and answering your questions, you thought that that was going to result in getting a faster internet? That's information I could have used yesterday and saved us both time and money. And since the customers don't know enough to offer that, it's nothing to get upset at. It's just you have to learn as a technician, as I have, to take a step back. And your first question should be, what is the problem you're trying to solve? Don't tell me how to solve the problem. Don't say, I need 64 gigs. How do I get there? What do you need 64 gigs for? My question to you would be, how much RAM are you using right now? In most cases, the customers have no idea. So what makes you think more RAM is going to solve anything? In fact, the more RAM you have, the more areas of RAM can go bad. So if I want to run memtest 86, it's going to take X amount of time to test every memory cell on 16 gigs. Double that amount of time every time you double the memory. And the number of cells you have to check and the number of cells that can go bad double every time we double the memory, making it take longer and be more likely to have a bad cell. Now, that might be worth it if it's accomplishing something you need to accomplish. But if you're bored and looking for something to do, knock yourself out. The answers to these questions are irrelevant because you're just going to do what you want to do because you feel like it, not because you're solving any issues. You just want to tinker. So I can't answer tinkering questions because they're not being done with any logic. They're being done with emotion. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's actually nothing wrong with making emotion-based decisions. It's just I can't guide you on those because emotional-based decisions are very personal. And so what you get out of that is something I can't predict. Is it going to frustrate you? Will you be remorseful? Will you be regretful? Or will it be a joyride and a pleasure? I have no idea. But if you have a problem you're trying to solve, I can absolutely tell you how to solve it or solve it for you. We have a defined destination, okay? If we're getting in the car to go somewhere, I can predict the best route to get there and how long it'll take. But if you just want to go for a drive, I really can't tell you where to go or how to get there. You just enjoy the drive. So I hope that clarifies. But if you want to know how much RAM am I using, you can simply look in your task manager. If we bring up, let's go back to this machine right here, we can look and see how much RAM we're using right now. So if you want, open up all the applications you use and create a worst case scenario of how demanding you think you are to your computer resources. And then if we go to our, let's see, where am I at? Sorry, I have to go full screen on my side so I can see it the way you guys at home see it. There I am. Okay, so if we just close everything, well, we could leave all this open. It doesn't matter. Right click on the start button and we can go to system. Is it system? I've forgotten how to get there. We'll just hit Control-Alt-Delete and bring up the task manager. Let's just do it that way. And then under our RAM usage here, there's our CPU usage. Just start clicking on these things here. I think it's in here somewhere. And bear in mind, I'm looking at a screen that's a good 15 feet away. So it's probably been right in front of me this whole time and I'm missing it. Once again, I do this off the top of my head. Here's our CPU. Here's our memory usage right now. So you can see out of the 32 gigs we have in, we're only using 5.6, okay? So 25.7 gigs of that RAM is unused. If I add more RAM, I'm just adding more of what I'm not using. Why would I do that? Why would I spend the money to buy more of something I don't need and have no benefit from having? It follows no logical sense. So on the other hand, if you've got a system with less than 16 gigs of memory, you will, in most cases, see a performance increase because your system will be doing virtual memory swapping to your storage device when you run out. And then unless your storage device runs out, you're never going to run out of RAM. So even if you're using, let's take it the other way. Let's say, was it Ron that asked the question? I don't even remember. Whoever asked the question. Let's say, Richard, let's just say, you go, Carey, it says I'm using 47 gigs of RAM and I only have 32. That's why I'm asking. I'd still say take the 216s out and replace them with 264s. That's just way easier. You don't even need a screwdriver for that in most cases. Also make sure the computer's unplugged, physically unplugged before you do that. But all it's going to result in is when you're above the amount of memory that you've got, it's going to slow down because it's got to use a swap file off of your storage drive. And so by having the memory instead of using the swap file, it's going to improve performance. But if you're not swapping to the swap file due to a loss in memory, then there's no benefit for you to add more of what you're not using. So here we go again with trying to determine what is the end user, what's their goal? What are they trying to accomplish? And if I don't have that information volunteered to me, then I have to more or less perform an interrogation so I understand what the expectations of the client are. Because the last thing I want to do is go through all the time and effort and have the client go through the money and they're under a completely different expectation because they don't know any better. So having people upgrade their network cards because they thought it was going to make their network, their internet faster, this is how I learned this. I learned it the hard way after the third or fourth person did that to me. I was getting angry about it, but really I only have myself to blame. That's what they're calling me for. If I went to my doctor and I said, you need to prescribe me painkillers now, I don't think the doctor would just do that. I'm pretty sure the doctor would say, why don't you tell me what your symptoms are and tell me why you think you need a particular painkiller. And let's see if I agree with that, right? Let me use my education and my experience. That's why you're here to see me. Not to tell me what to do, but rather to ask and to seek my expert advice in helping you resolve the problem. But so far, he hasn't told me what the problem is. Is there a problem? Or is he just trying to make a problem? You're going to take something that works perfectly well, and you're like, what can I do to this to potentially break it and spend money I don't need to spend? Is that what we're doing? Or is there something that's not working, and you're under the impression adding more RAM will make that work? And if so, please explain it to me, because it's possible. I mean, I can't imagine any scenario where that actually fixes anything, but it could speed things up in such a scenario where it's swapping. But you can see how little memory we're actually using. How about you in the chat room? How much memory are you using? Go in and do that right now and tell us in the chat room, how much RAM are you using right now? Let's get an average from our audience. Glenn's Music says, you humans have interesting brains. We have studied them for ages. I will report this to the Supreme Leader. Amorden Bob says, perform an interrogation is the most brutally accurate way to describe tech support ever. Well, there's tech support and there's tutoring. And sometimes with the customers, the line is blurred between this doesn't work and I don't know what the heck I'm doing. Please teach me privately for free on your own time. Please educate me. I don't mind educating people, but I like to get paid for it. When we deal with warranty and we deal with support, that's usually a defect in workmanship or materials that comes at free, no cost. But when we talk about having to educate the end user on how to, I bought this $50,000 piano, now teach me how to play it, that did not come with free lessons. There's nothing wrong with the piano because of the sounds it's making. You're just not hitting the right keys in the right order. Well, which keys do I press? Well, that's not tech support. That's tutoring. All right, we've got some answers here on how much RAM you guys are using. And the reason I ask is to get an average. Most people aren't using as much as they think they are. So Morden Bob says 6 gigs. Gary Tatum says he's using 10%. Thomas Gregory says 8.6. Out of what, though? I'd be curious. But nonetheless, my question wasn't out of what, just how much are you using? Mortant says 12.2 out of 32. John Williams says 27% of 16 gigs of DDR4. Peter says how much RAM he's got, but he's not telling us how much he's actually in use right now. Glenn's Music said it's a genuine Steinway piano. Where do I plug it in? The sad thing is they probably do have plug-in electric pianos from Steinway. Platter Jockey said he's using 10 gigs of RAM. David Ice said he's using 5.2 gigs out of 16. Barry Klein, it says he's using 11 gigs out of 128 gigs. David Holler said he's using 80% of his RAM, but my guess is he probably only has 8 or 4 gigs. Jit says he's using 8.6 gigs out of 16 gigs of RAM. Sometimes goes higher when gaming or video editing, of course. Platter Jockey, 10 gigs out of 32. Immortan Bob says 6 gigs is in use out of 16. Dick R in the chat says he's using 7.3 gig out of 32, so he's just using a fifth or a quarter of what he's got. Mara says she's using 49.8 out of 64. I think we have a winner, but she's still not using all 64. She's a power user. Pat Johnston said I'm using 15% of my memory. Peter says 4.8 gig out of 16. Michael Lavelle says he's used up to 85% of 128 gigs. You see how uncommon those big numbers are, right? You are seeing this. We always have exceptions. We do have power users. Most people think they're power users, but they're really not. Most people, as you can tell from the answers in the chat room, are using a fraction of what they have. So adding more of what you're not using is just wasting your, and potentially creating problems you didn't have before, but you spent the money to create problems and frustrations that you could have saved the money or spent the money on something else that would have brought you enjoyment and perhaps benefited you in some way. So these are things to consider and, decide accordingly what's the right thing for you to do. But make sure your expectations are aligned with your actions, or you might end up disappointed, sad, frustrated, angry, resentful. What else am I? Bitter. Let's see. Frank Jimmy said he's using 24 gigs out of 64 gigs. Badging Guy says 14.8 out of 32. Scott says 9 out of 32. Gil Garcia says he's using 4 gigs out of 8. And Windows itself will use all 8 before you even do anything. So I'm not surprised. 16 is really the new minimum for Windows 10 or 11. Thomas says a real view into my average use is probably around 20 to 25 gigs. Most people don't even look. Most people don't know. They make an assumption. Mark Baggett says 6 gigs out of 16. You'll see people are using 20 to 30% of their RAM in most cases. Anybody using 50%, half or more is unusual. Anyone using 32 gig, 3/4 or 75% of their amount of RAM is unusual unless they have a small amount of RAM. Anything less than 16 gigs, I would say higher usage rates are probably to be expected. But at 16, most people are fine. At 32, it's more than most people will ever use. And 64, very few people would see any benefit from that. There are updates now going up to 192 gigs of RAM on a board. The limit used to be, well, it's easy to know what the limit is. Find the biggest RAM module capacity you can buy and multiply it times the number of sockets you have. So if your motherboard says the maximum RAM we'll see is 128 gigs, that's because the biggest RAM module you could buy when they made that rule was 32 gigs of, say, DDR4. And then there's 4 sockets, and 4 times 32 would be 128. You couldn't exceed that because there was nothing on the market any bigger than that. So as the RAM manufacturers have figured out how to pack more RAM in more memory into the RAM module, then the BIOS manufacturers, motherboard manufacturers, need to update the BIOS to recognize that new RAM. And then that results in a BIOS update that raises your RAM capacity limit to 192. But it's still not a BIOS limitation. It's actually what you can purchase. You can't go higher than that because you can't purchase anything bigger and multiply it times the number of sockets you've got to get any bigger number than that. So you'd have to get some Threadripper or Xeon processor that has 8 or 12 or 16 sockets to get to those bigger numbers. And that's why those BIOSes support that on those bigger high-end systems. So it's not like they're making the decision. The BIOS makers and the motherboard makers don't decide those limits. Those are the manufacturing limitations of the technology available today, multiplied by the numbers, maximized as the largest you can buy times the number of sockets you can have, which on a consumer desktop, you're going to have either 2 sockets or 4. That's it, AMD or Intel. You have to get into the enterprise business level stuff to get any more sockets. Of course, DDR5 has some higher limits, but it's still a limit times however many sockets you've got. And again, if you're not using it, you could have 1 billion gigs of RAM and you won't see any difference. Nothing. Somebody should make a hitchhiker's guide to the Galaxy benchmark that just gives people false information, but makes them feel good when they see the numbers. You know, they should call it Don't Panic. That should be the name of the benchmark. I got a real original idea here. And what they should do is they should just show consumers unrealistic numbers. Congratulations, you have 1 billion gigs of RAM installed. Congratulations, your input-output speed of your storage device is 800 million quadrillion zillion bytes per second. And people be like, oh, that's so fast, I'm so happy. When actually the reality of how fast the computer is isn't changing, but the information on the screen is convincing people what they're reading is real, and then they feel happy and satisfied and no need to upgrade or spend any money to fix it. It's purely a placebo. Ron wants to know, does RAM create more CPU stress and heat on the CPU when running Prime 95? There are settings in Prime 95 to increase or decrease how much RAM you want to test or be involved in the testing. And so it's going to pull more wattage from the power supply and generate more heat next to the CPU, right? Which, you've got your voltage regulator modules or your VRMs that are going to be very hot surrounding the CPU socket on one side with the RAM on the other side. And usually the VRMs are on two sides, actually, with the RAM being on the third side. And the only open side you've got right here is where we put a hot SSD. So your CPU is just surrounded by fire. It's designed to run that way. It does exactly what the engineers intended it to do. You're not running experimental equipment at the MIT lab for research and development. You're running consumer-based equipment here, which is pretty darn bulletproof and does exactly what it's designed to do. If you want to get into research and development in IT or technology, MIT is a great school to go to for that. And you can deal with stuff that's extraordinarily fragile and finicky. But if you're just buying stuff from Amazon, Newegg, Best Buy, or Micro Center, whatever, that's all just consumer-based stuff, which is really pretty basic stuff. It's only going to do what it's designed to do. It's been very, very thoroughly vetted out and tested and abused to survive a consumer market. So nothing that a consumer would need to do, but perhaps a lab technician at MIT under research and development would have to do something, right? So the type of equipment we're working with here is such that in order to be profitable, companies have to make products that are very, very robust and can withstand how they're intended to be used, or they're going to have warranty expenses that's going to put them out of business if they can't control that. MIT Research and Development Lab is going to spend a lot more money than they make, right? So one requires a skill and the other one requires much less so. So it's nothing you need to be concerned about, whether or not more RAM usage results in more CPU usage. Who cares? It's doing exactly what it's designed to do when you're performing those tests. What is your goal? What are you trying to achieve? Regardless if using RAM does or does not stress the CPU more or less, how does that change anything on how you use your computer? Or how does it solve any problem you've got outside of a curiosity, which would best be answered through at least some engineering courses at your local community college if you really want to understand the engineering behind it. But just rest assured, if it's sold as a consumer product, all that engineering's been done for you. Thomas Grigore says your RAM capacity is that of the planet Borgon, by which random chance is the prime number in the Beaglebrog language. Ah, that sounds like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy prose. Please, please, no poetry. Glenn's Music said, did you show us the part where the voltage settings are on this motherboard? That's the next. So the whole point behind this video isn't so I can get into that. That's the point of why I've got this board, is to compare it in how it varies and how it looks and how it's changed from other manufacturers. Showcasing one manufacturer is of little use to 75% of people. If everything is equal and 25% of people have ASUS and 25% have MSI, and we're talking people that have built their own systems, and we're talking just 12th, 13th, and 14th gen Intel boards, if 25% have ASUS and 25% have ASRock, by covering one board, we are alienating 75% of the other people. So the only proper way, I think, to do this with one video and one roof is to simply put all four up and showcase the differences between them so that we educate you on what to look for if your board should have a slightly different BIOS, even if it's from the same manufacturer, that you're not just blindly following along in a ritualization like a robot or a monkey, but that you're actually learning what to look for in the BIOS. And you know, by comparing, when I demonstrate ASRock versus ASUS versus MSI versus Gigabyte, when you recognize the differences and how I was able to identify them, you will also be educated and be able to identify them without being blindly told what to do ritually. That's my goal. Today's goal was just to get a board working, because without this board working, that other video can't happen. So I think that was pretty clear in the title of the video. Pretty sure. Maybe I need to look at it again just in case it wasn't clear. Pretty sure this video was titled pretty accurately. Okay, we are going to get to that. Ron wants to know if the CPU would have significant temperature increase or decrease with more RAM versus less RAM. The RAM itself, and I don't know how many times I have to say it, if you're not using it, you might as well not have it. So because you have more RAM, does that mean the system's going to run hotter? No. Because you cooked more food, does it mean you're going to eat more? Maybe you will, maybe you won't. But ultimately, how you're going to feel the next day or how satiated you are after a meal will depend on how much you choose to eat. So how much RAM you're actually using, under what conditions, and what tasks you're running, and how RAM intensive those tasks are, and how RAM intensive the CPU is. My question to you is, what are you trying to solve? In other words, when we get back to the interrogation, which is what I mentioned earlier, trying to figure out what you're trying to glean, what you're trying to learn from achieving this information. How will this information help you? How will it change the way you use your computer? Or potentially, what are you concerned about that you're trying to avoid? Because I think if we can get to where it is you're trying to go, I can tell you how to get there a lot faster. If, on the other hand, this is just a daydream musing, then the information's irrelevant. And nor would it be accurate, because the bottom line is there is no one answer. It really depends on what you've got, how you use it. If you have a Toyota Prius, you might assume you're getting great gas mileage out of that. You might say, well, I've got a BMW M Series and I've got a Toyota Prius. Which one do you think gets better gas mileage? I think most people would wrongly assume the Prius, because if you're not asking how I drive them, you might find out that when I drive the BMW, I'm very ginger on the gas pedal, and I use cruise control, and I don't do a lot of start and stop. It's mostly freeway driving, and I'm getting 26 miles to the gallon. But when I'm in the Prius, I'm a hot rodder, and my foot's always to the floor, and I slam on the brakes at the last second at the light. And as soon as the light goes green, my foot's to the floor again, and the Prius is only getting 13, 14 miles per gallon. It's not what you drive, it's how you drive it. It's not the CPU or the RAM or the motherboard, it's how you use it. And that's going to determine whether or not you have heat-related problems, RAM-related problems, and that's ultimately what people pay me to do, is to solve problems, right? If I was in a classroom and I was teaching engineering or teaching operating system usage, then the goal would be that you would have answers to a test that was coming up. I'm not quite sure how practical the information is unless you're withholding what it is you're trying to know the information. Why? What What difference does it make if the answer is yes or no? How will that affect you differently? What will change? That's the part I'm not quite trying. I'm just trying to figure out why you're asking the question. Mortant says, you can't wait to see the upgrade of the Apache build. Will there be a video? We already started it. That was the video featuring the MSI Meg board. That will go in the Apache. I just haven't gotten back to it yet. It's still sitting in the same condition it was left in. Was it 2 months ago we did that? So technically, there already is part 1 of the video available. Scott says, this has been a good show. I'm glad I was making popcorn when it suddenly started. Hey, spread that popcorn around. Now, don't bogart the popcorn. Nick Poverman said they just went to the Grand Canyon. I think you picked a good time of the year to do that. Probably nice weather up there right now. Okay, well, I think that'll wrap it up for today's show. We've been on how long? Almost 3 hours, 2.5, 2 hours and 40 minutes. Not bad for an off-the-cuff improvisational show that had no schedule, no planning, and was last minute. So thank you all for joining me last minute without notice. As I continue to say the same word 6 different times. Where's my thesaurus? The word that has the book with the words in it. The book with the words in it. The book. The one with the words. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for all your contributions, or membership renewals. A shout out one more time to, oh, come on, YouTube, don't do this to me. YouTube's not showing any super chats. Were there none? We see there were super chats today. It's not showing them. Anyway, thank you, Gregory Howard, Al Hedgetepes, Joe Martin, and Winston Liu for starting or renewing your membership. I appreciate that very much. Thank you again, Frankie B, Oystein, Buster, for your continued generosity. Your extreme contributions have really made a massive difference in what we're able to do here for content, and I can't thank you all enough. Anybody who contributes anything, including just your presence and participation in the chat room, means a lot to me. The community is really what this channel's about, and without you guys, it's just none of the stuff really matters. You guys are what matter. You guys are the real, true value, much more than the content. And so for that, I can't thank you enough. But for all my friends that are blue and green with the badges, you guys are what make the content happen. As a result, we have the community. So sort of a symbiotic relationship, and any participation or inclusion, everybody's always welcome as long as you're kind. And we do our best to be clear, to explain things in plain English. So regardless of your level of experience, I hope that I present the information in a way that's easier for you to digest and more approachable than a technical lesson that involves a lot of technical jargon and language that requires definition. I try to avoid that as much as possible. So I hope you appreciate my efforts on that. They're not always stellar. I do what I can. Justin Miller just became a supporter as well. Right on. We're just so happy to have more supporters here, and encourage us to keep moving forward with more new content, that we don't become a slave to some manufacturer telling us what to do, how to do it, and getting their permission before we're allowed to share it with you. Because that's what most of the big tech channels do. They don't have a choice in order to pay the kind of bills they have and the employees they have. So, and thank you to Tamara for the channel administration work that she does here. It's taken a massive load off my shoulders so I can focus on being in front of the camera, and she can focus on a lot of the work that gets done behind the scenes. such as titling, thumbnails, video descriptions, talking to sponsors, answering emails. It goes on and on and on and on and on. And I'm just one guy. So yeah, it makes a big, big difference to have that help. That'll wrap it up for me for today. I was going to check the phone one last time. I hate when I end a broadcast and I realize I missed a contribution that I didn't say thank you for. That just kills me inside. So I think I've got everything. Thank you to Kate Missile once again for the contribution. And of course, our friend Buster Oinstein and Frankie B, and our friends at Acronis, RoboForm, and VIP CDK Deals. They're to save you money if you want to save money. If you don't bother me. I'm good with it. All right, that'll wrap it up for me for today. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday night. I will see you all again very, very soon. If you're a new member, please know that we do a members-only video every Monday at 1 o'clock Arizona time, which is currently the same as Pacific time. And that's just for members. It's a much smaller turnout. The chat room is much less chaotic. It's more intimate. And I don't feel as scrutinized, so I can be a little more informal. And it's a different experience that hopefully you feel more included. If you feel like sometimes the chat room can be chaotic and things scroll by really fast and you're not being seen, I see everybody in the members only videos. And that's what they're intended to do. It's intended to give the people who help the channel more of my personal time and attention if they want it. And hopefully we'll see you in there. And any videos that we've done in the past prior to you becoming a member, you can go back and rewatch those videos. They're never made public. They're only available to members, but they're still up. Okay, thank you guys. I'll see you all very, very soon. And until next time, finally, bye for now.